Only to let you know. That's hilarious. Super hilarious. Well, oh, we just said it's hilarious. Okay, what is hilarious? Just kidding. All right, we're all set. We're good. Okay, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It is April. That's crazy. Just have to say, April the 8th at 3 p.m. So we'll just call this work session to order. If we could do a roll call today, maybe starting with the 17th.
Kate Color, District 2.
Travis Hinkle, District 3.
Carter Newberg, Xander Brown, District 1. Dr. Consequential says she, her, superintendent.
Dave Larson, in District 5.
Keep on flooding around.
Oh, Michael Croyle, principal at Thorndike Elementary School, he, him.
I'm just Danielle Eastman and I have daughters at Tukwila. Amy Fleming, she her, Naomi Berto, she her director of communications and engagement.
Aaron Durgana, EM pronouns and HR.
That was my bad. Usually I start with the whole shebang about why we do roll calls all around the table. It's so that we know who's at this work session, because it's more of a team-based collaborative time. So welcome to all of our guests, both joining us in person and online, either live or listening to the work session later. Okay, if we could get a motion for the approval of today's agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right. That brings us, we have 2 items up for our discussion today. The first is happy to have you here, Principal Croyle, to walk us through the Thorndike School Improvement Plan.
Okay, so we'll get going on that now. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide you all with an update on Thorndike School Improvement Plan. As part of the district's strategic plan, Thorndike School Improvement Plan is aligned with the focus of the areas around here. Which is pivotal to the work that we do each day with our students. And then at Thorndike, our approach to behavior is grounded in our commitment to the 6 anti-racist goals. Okay, not there yet. Sorry. At Thorndike, our approach to behavior is grounded in our commitment to the 6 anti-racist goals with a key focus on anti-bias discipline. We are actively examining and disrupting practices that disproportionately impact students of color by using Swiss data to identify patterns that have been critical and shifting our practices toward restorative responses to behavior. We also prioritize ongoing professional development that challenges bias, building culture competence, and deepens our understanding in systematic racism. This is not a one-time effort, but a continuous journey to ensure our policies, practices, and daily interactions are aligned with our district's strategic plan, thus creating a school environment where every student feels seen, valued, and empowered. This work is embedded in Thorndike's improvement plan and is further supported through our partnership with Belong Partners. So slide. And then, yeah, here we go. At Thorndike, we create Black history, culture, and contributions year-round, not just in February during Black History Month. We embed culturally relevant learning content into art, music, as well as core subject areas such as math and reading, to ensure representation and inclusion as part of our everyday learning for students. For example, the art projects students engaged in throughout the year, as well as recently adopted iReady math curriculum, which features cultural connections in each lesson, helping students see real world content of math and themselves and the curriculum. This slide highlights our students in action, engaging in meaningful art projects across all 3 elementary schools in our district. These projects not only showcase their creativity and talent, but also reflect our school's commitment to integrating the arts as a powerful tool for expression, culture learning, cultural learning, and community building. Whether they're painting, drawing, or working collaboratively, our students are using art to explore ideas, tell stories, and connect with one another and hands-on activities. This slide captures the pride and sense of accomplishment students feel upon completing their artwork. The following slides highlight the impactful work we're doing at Thorndike to support academic growth. Our school's improvement plan breaks down the reading goal by grade level. For simplicity's sake, we are going to look at the data as an overall average for all students in reading. This data is really encouraging as it indicates we are moving towards meeting our stretch growth goal.
Can I ask a question about is your stretch goal increased by 10% or 10 percentage points?
That's correct.
Which one?
Oh, say that one more time, Dr. Wilson.
Is the goal to increase the percent of students that are meeting their stretch goal by 10%?
That is
10 percentage
10.
points?
10%.
10%.
Yes.
So it's currently at 18, so plus another couple points. Yeah, okay.
Okay, this slide shows that if you look at 37.1%, that 37% of our students are over 50% on track toward meeting their stretch goal, according to the Winter iReady reading diagnostic. Based on these results, we feel confident that we will exceed last year's stretch growth goal in reading. I think it's important to note that stretch growth goals are specific to each student based on iReady diagnostic assessments, which is given 3 times a year in the fall, winter, and spring. Typical growth is students making 1 year progress, whereas stretch growth measures students going up beyond 1 year's worth of progress.
So I want to make sure I understand this. So what you're saying is the students that are 0 to 25 means that they're achieved, somewhere between 0 and 25% of their stretch growth.
Mhm.
So 37% are in that category.
Yes. Yep.
Going up. Okay. So
And then
the question is, do we know who, like in that lower, so the students at the top that have achieved more than 50% of their stretch growth goal are really good shape. I mean, obviously going into. So the question becomes, who are the students? Have you broken down the students that are in that 0 to 25? Do we know who they are? Are they the students that are 2 or more grade levels behind? Are they,
for this board presentation, I didn't specifically gather that information, but I most certainly could follow up with you on that.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see how you're kind of targeting, breaking it down, disaggregating it by race and by, where they are. Because it's one thing if the students that are doing, really well, are the 37%. It's another one if the students that are, 2 or more grade levels behind are not. Those are the ones we want, getting more than 50% of their stretch growth. So that distinction is kind of important, it seems to me.
I'm curious, kind of on that topic, I assume having the graph here aside, are those conversations that y'all are having, are y'all disaggregating that data as a team to really be able to identify?
Yes, our
Who
MTSS
those kids are?
coach and our MLL interventionist working together to identify those students and provide targeted interventions for those students.
Okay.
As you can see, this graph breaks down percentage of students by race showing progress toward annual stretch growth. And I think for the purpose of this presentation and and what's outlined in our school improvement plan growth goals, identify Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino students. Black African American students are about 36% of meeting their stretch growth goal, and then Hispanic Latino are about 39% of meeting their stretch growth goal.
And that's 36% of 100% of the students that identify as Black.
That is correct.
So the conclusion I'm drawing from this is basically there aren't any big disproportionalities. Everybody's
That is
more or
correct.
less at the same,
That's
with the
correct.
exception American Indian, but I kind of wonder about. the
Yeah,
inside-
those were- yeah, those
the
were-
inside is
So
really-
2 students were identified
Yeah,
there, and and Native Hawaiian were 14 students.
Right. That's why I wonder, I mean, and I guess I worry about reporting, you know, these, I mean, going into FERPA populations, if we're reporting, you know, less than 10, and we may not want to do that.
Well, but if there's not a number of, so where we actually see the disproportionality difference is we're looking to see if there's 36% of our Black African American students compared to them being 60% of the enrollment, right? But so if we don't have that enrollment, yeah, so if you've got, so the disparity conversation happens when you look at the actual versus where they are relative to the overall student population. And I guess I wonder and it's about the FERPA thing, if we're not listing how many young people we're talking about, then 25% doesn't give me actually any FERPA information, or violation, because that doesn't, there's no number with which to compare that to say, oh, there's only 2 students.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and so if we have to look at it from a disproportionate, as long as you don't have the numbers identified and you just have it based on that. It is interesting though, and I think that's something to talk about, you know, if you have 25% of your students, and it's such a small number, then that is an area of focus, right? It should be an area of focus, right? Because if you have a small number and everyone else is sort of not such a big gap between all of them, but there is a bigger gap in that one group, and it's the smallest number, it should be an MTSS focus, like what is it that we're not doing in supporting the students? Correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and so I wonder though, and you brought that up last time, Director Larson, right, the inside, I agree with you. And I do think that at least if we put on the website or on whatever we put on post, we need to take out any enrollment numbers that are below this, you're right.
And as far as these 35, 30, these are not in relation to their total population. That's not what these numbers are.
Exactly, which I think is where, don't you have to have both numbers to actually identify where the disproportionality then comes, right? Because if 50% of your, I'm just now throwing it out right as, but let's say 50% of Black African American students are achieving their growth goals, but 70, it's relative to the, I'm sorry, my words are not working well today. It's relative to the overall
Yeah.
enrollment.
But these numbers
Right.
are not.
I understand that. That's why I'm saying, like, this doesn't actually tell us where the disproportionality lives fully. It doesn't give us that complete picture because we're not seeing it compared to the enrolled students within that demographic group, right?
Well, it could, I mean, if, you know, Black students were at 25 and, you know, white students are at 40, that's a disproportionality. The fact that they're all relatively the same means that they're in this particular measure, and this is one measure,
Yeah.
there isn't a disproportion.
So
Yeah.
I just have one question. When I look at this and you put this together, what are you trying to communicate to me?
We're identifying what percentage of students are represented toward meeting their stretch growth goal.
And then, I don't know if you have a comparison, but is this an improvement over a year ago? You didn't measure a year ago? What does this tell us?
I don't have the data in front of me for last year, but definitely we are moving, we are in much better position than we were last year for sure.
Thank
And
you.
I'll get into some of that as we go on to the.
Yeah, there's other things that show that. I mean, you can't. I mean, you have to kind of take these measures in totality, because different ones show different aspects of it.
Mhm.
That's why they're giving you a variety of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
But I think it is important when you show us a number, there should be some kind of. What do we, you know, what does this show us kind of thing? And it could be one part of the big picture, but, you know. So that's why I said, for me, the takeaway I have from this is that this particular measure is not showing disproportionality other than American Indian.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's, never mind.
Well, I would say what this shows to me as a superintendent is, so when you go back to the original of reading, they have a targeted goal to support Black and brown Latino students, right? That is their target. They're focusing on all students,
Mhm.
but that is their target. When I look down below, that I see progress towards that, right? So what I see is that at this mid-year time, that they've made a targeted approach, and so that's what the data shows us, is that they're actually been intentional to make sure that they're doing that, and they're having some success in that area. Now, we still have the rest of the year to go, and what I would love to hear too, more, which I'm hoping to get to, is the strategies and what you've done to course correct. But it's just a little snapshot in that that's a target that you've made some progress in that area, and then you're gonna share us with more data.
Yeah, and that's as of January's, the winter iReady
Yeah.
diagnostic. Okay, and then this slide shows annual progress toward typical growth in reading. The way we get to stretch growth is by increasing the number of students meeting their typical growth early in the year. We are seeing success with typical growth over a period of time in reading for all students. As you can see, there's each year, data is based on the winter diagnostic for each respective school year shown in the bar graph. So,
So this is a good one because what it's a trend one, so it's showing a nice upward trend, which is good. And so then we can say, you know, some of the things, some of the strategies you're using are working.
okay. As you can see in this graph, the breakdown percentage of students by race meeting typical growth. Again, we just had the discussion regarding the breakdown, but with focus on Black African American students, about 66% of those students are meeting typical growth, and Hispanic Latino students are about 68% meeting their typical growth. And then our school improvement goal in math. Our school improvement plan breaks down the math goal by grade level. For simplicity, again, we're going to look at data as an overall average for all grades in math. This data is really encouraging as it indicates we're moving toward meeting our stretch growth goal. And then again, as a reminder, the way that we measure stretch growth goals are not, it's very specific to each student. And again, you know, we give the iReady diagnostic 3 times a year.
So the metric there, you say increase 10% from 24-25, you mean 23-24?
Yeah, so the metric is 5th grade students will reach, so increase by 10% for 24-25. And
From, let's just say from, I mean, the goal is, the baseline is 23-24, and you're increasing 10% in order to get to 24.
that is correct.
And so it should be from 23-24.
This slide shows that about 37% of students are over 50% towards meeting their stretch growth goal according to the winter iReady math diagnostic. And again, based on the results, we feel confident that we will meet or exceed last year's stretch growth goal.
It's interesting to me that the numbers for reading and math in this category are virtually identical.
Yeah, that was very interesting when we were breaking it down.
I kind of scratched my head.
Yeah,
Really?
we were, when we were looking at the data, we were as well.
Okay,
So, yeah.
but you double checked and
Yeah.
it's okay.
Now I'm preparing Director Lawrence.
What was that?
Now I'm going back to preparing.
As you can see, the bar graph breaks down percentage of students by race again, as we did for reading. Black African American students are about 45% meeting their stretch growth goal, and then Hispanic Latino are about 43% meeting their stretch growth goal.
Just a quick question, when you see the bar for Native American, Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islanders, you see a lower percent. Is there a change in the program? Sees that, starts to put energy into it, or is that just a measure and we plow on?
I'm sorry, can you, Kate, can you please?
When I look at the Native American, Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander, it could be one person for all I know, or it could be, you know, 50.
That category represents 14 students.
Okay.
Yeah, right there.
And there are half of what less than half of what everything else there features. Do we put extra focus on that somehow?
It was something that we identified through putting this presentation together and one of our data meetings as well.
Yes, excellent opportunity, so just thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I guess one of the big one that comes up for me is, particularly attendance. So, we see that there's a pretty high correlation between attendance and, outcomes. So first question I would wonder is, what's the attendance of the students? I mean, are they low attendance for some reason? I don't know. It's one possible explanation. I'd be curious what do you guys come up with as the explanation for that?
Great. And then annual progress towards equal growth and math. As I mentioned earlier, the way we get to stretch growth is by increasing the number of students meeting their typical growth early in the year. We are seeing more typical growth in math this school year with an increase of 6% of all students compared to the last 3 school years. And I attribute some of that to new math curriculum and then incorporating more GLAD strategies, and GLAD stands for Guided Language Acquisition Design. And I'll talk a little bit about that further on in the presentation.
Can I just pause for a second? Sorry, Principal Coyle. So Director Wilson, did you ask a question about attendance? I just want to make sure that got answered. Did you ask a question about, can you repeat the
I
question?
did, I don't think we have, when you're digging down into this data, I know, having seen, between comparing schools, if the students aren't coming to school, it's got to be instructive.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I think that correlates to some of these numbers, I just want to make sure that we're.
Yeah.
And because I have a feeling, and, we at various times in the districts have done attendance pushes to try and get that, and it may be, can it be time for something like that again, and maybe directed at certain groups, I don't know.
We have it as a school principal.
Okay.
So that.
Yeah, I know
so,
there. And so this, just curious as to.
Yeah, I definitely will follow up on looking at those specific students. I think it's a good point to bring up as a point of reference. So thank you. Okay, and then. Okay, progress towards equal growth by race. Again, as you can see, the breakdown of students. So Black African American students are about 68% of the typical stretch growth goal, and Latino students are about 64% meeting their typical growth goal in math.
Director Crowe, can I just ask one question? This is just a little simple thing, just to remind the audience and the board community. So one of the things I just want to make sure when people, what no one doesn't walk away from is any student here that is listed, you have an MTSS process. We explained this for the board a while ago, but just a reminder, it's multi-tiered system of supports. And it's an intervention team that you have in your school. Can you share a little bit about the work that you guys have done this year, just a teeny bit about MTSS, and just reminding everyone what that looks like and who's involved, which of your staff members are involved on your MT, just a 2 to 3 minute sentence, just to remind the public what that is. So just so people understand that when when you're talking about there's through MTSS or interventions, what does that actually look like in a school? Because a lot of people don't understand.
So our MTSS team consists of, we have a school, our school social worker, I wouldn't say it's directly, but if you look at the umbrella of the MTSS, we have a school social worker. Part of our attendance secretary, Miss Lewis is part of that. Kimberly Goodman, our school social worker. Adam Spar is our building MTSS coach intervention in that position. We also work very closely with our MLL team, which is Sarah Skipworth and Sharon Shipman. And so, and what we do, and classroom teachers also are reporting, there's all of the testing results and things that interventions and stuff like that is reported on the spreadsheets. And so we use that information to help identify which students are going to be receiving targeted interventions in groups. And I'll talk about this a little bit further in the presentation. So this year, all of our MLL students are being served in a push-in model, which has been really, I think has been pretty successful. with a targeted area of writing, which has been an area that's been identified for building.
Thank you. Thank you.
So is another word for an MTSS team, care team? Or is that something, I mean, we hear that a lot too. Is that the same thing? Or something?
I mean, there's a lot of overlap, I think, so we do have a care team, right? I think that would fall in, under the umbrella of MTSS. That meets, every Wednesday, and so students that are, there's a protocol that we follow, and sometimes, it could be academics, it could be social SEL. And of course, our MTSS coach, interventionist, our MLL team sits on our school psychologist is on that as well. School social worker are part of that as well.
It sounds to me like it's exactly the same. Why do we?
Well, again, I'll highlight, MTSS is an umbrella with lots of different things.
Yeah,
So the PBIS.
so when you say MTSS team,
Mhm.
what you just described sounds an awful lot to me like, well, what I've heard before called the care team.
Yeah. There's.
And just kind of wondering, are they two different things? Are they the same thing? Or is this an opportunity for efficiency?
I would say that MTSS, so the care team falls under that umbrella of supports, right? So MTSS is is a multi-tiered approach with, with various stakeholders at the table
Yeah.
discussing where students are at and what their needs are.
It's almost like is it like death by team, right? Where we're just a part of, we have so many teams that are collaborating on the same thing, where then it gets too many things. So I think that's kind of what you were alluding to, like, is it too much?
I think the difference between the care team and MTSS is like the umbrella for all students, right? And care team focuses really on specific students that are lagging in skills and academic and social emotional learning.
One actually is, so the MTSS team is more focused on tier 1 support. And it does move up, but the care team is when students are really struggling, right? So it's kind of like that. I will consider it like the next tier of tier 2 and 3, actually, in terms of really getting specific.
Oh, okay, okay, so I think I get it now. So the MTSS team is the kind of the overall structure of all these different components that were in SEL and all that.
Mhm.
And the care teams are focusing on specific students that need the more intensive
Target,
intervention. Okay.
Yeah, one's more about the system
Yeah,
and one's about the student.
okay.
So MTSS being the system and
Yeah,
then care being about.
So, not to overextend, but I am concerned about the lowest bar, and I'm thinking we're halfway through the year, it was January when you did this chart. Is there a chance that the 5th column will catch up? Is there a chance that we have an expectation that
direct-
they're gonna meet a lower bar, or what's our, because the way this is broken out, I just have a ton of peers and friends who are in those categories, who are brilliant people, and so I just have to wonder what is going on. It's not, to me, and maybe I just don't know, it's a typical fail at this age, but it's certainly not a typical fail by the time they hit college. So what's going on?
Yeah, I most certainly will be bringing this information back and further into it. And as Director Larson said earlier, one of the places to look would be looking at attendance would be one of those areas, just as one reference point. And then
If it's not that though,
and then checking in with those individual students, right? So their teachers, it's a.
but at this point, do they have any chance of catching up with the rest of the curve? And was this like this last year? Is it a trend?
Your first question is yes. And I think too, remembering that, like, this is based on iReady, right? iReady data, which, as we heard in like other school presentations, there are so many different ways to gather information about proficiency or their knowledge about, right? So this really doesn't even tell the full picture about what those young people that 20% represents,
Right.
about where they are. It's just this, I don't know, but is there opportunity for growth within the iReady? Yeah, totally. And I think it'd be curious to see when we look at the spring assessment, that's where we might could see, hopefully some growth there.
Just to answer to, there might, so because the N size is small, some would be really thoughtful about this, but there might be some factors we don't know that's happening, right? The student maybe, there might be something, maybe a student has a health condition that is impeding their learning. Maybe
Okay.
there's something, there might be something more deeper, could be attendance, it could be social emotional, but that's why, and so that's why the care team exists too, right? So there's the systems question, which is for me is, what is, how are we, so it's the question I would ask the team, back to the work, if this, I saw this, I would go back to my team, so what are we, if we've had these two focuses, now we're seeing this, this trend, what are we not doing to support these students specifically? Like, what do we need to be doing to make sure that we are actually, what does it mean to be culturally, relevant, like all of those pieces, so that's one question I have. Or attendance, or what family relationship, do we not have family connections, like all of those questions, that's like a systems question I have. And then the question, if there is more things going on with those, one or two of those individual students at any level, right? So you look at, you got 52, you got this.
Mhm.
Then the question I would ask is, so what's happening, right? What's happening individually for those students? And that's where that care team piece comes in. And that's where they come in together and say, okay, for this one student, what are they needing differently? And you also need a variety of perspectives on that too, because this might be a student that's brilliant and able to visually like draw
Yes.
out their thinking, right? But in a written test or an electronic test can't show what they know, right? So that's where you get more nuanced and specific on the individual person. This is what we call, based back to street data, is that satellite data. And unfortunately, the satellite goes way up. And that's where the MTSS and the care team kind of breaks it down and goes into what they need to be doing to fix that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems when you get small insights.
Yeah,
A little variance in something
one,
can just blow
yeah.
it up. So you have to, that's where, you have to go back to the teachers and who know the students and
Yeah.
say, what do you know about those kids?
Yeah. But there's always systems things we can address, right? Because, so for example, I remember one time we had a meeting on it, it was a long time ago, I was a principal. And, we had a meeting, we made a plan, and somehow then the case manager that was monitoring the plan went on leave, like took it, and sometimes those things happen too, so those become adult issues, and that's a systems issue,
Which I think
right?
is important to remember too, because to the point you were making, like, we don't want to look at that number and assume that it's the deficit of the child, right? Because it
Absolutely.
isn't,
No,
right? And so,
Worried about us saying, well.
Yeah, and that's why-
in class, I'm all, boy.
yeah, that's why it's really important. I mean, I think anytime I see something that like in, even in my work, my first question is, okay, what are we doing? Or what are we not doing, right? Versus what has that student done or not done to perform well on that test?
Right.
But I appreciate you doing that, yeah.
Yeah, my first assumption is always, I assume the system is the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Until I prove it wrong.
Yeah.
Well, that's why that's the question for the MTSS team, right? To go back to the MTSS, look at this as our data. What do we think is happening here?
Yeah.
Right, that's the first question.
Because they were doing good on reading, so.
And we're very interactive, principal, for us, but the word says, we have these conversations, so yeah,
Okay, grab
thank you for indulging.
Yeah. Student voices are very important because they help us create inclusive, responsive, and empowering learning environments. Here are a few key reasons why that matters. Ownership engagement. When students feel heard, they are more likely to be invested in their learning and increase motivation, participation, and a sense of responsibility. Relevance, listening to students' perspectives helps classroom teachers design instruction that is meaningful and connected to students' lives, cultures, and the interest of students. Equity and belonging, centering students' voices, especially those from marginalized communities, ensures that diverse experiences and needs are acknowledged and valued. So in this slide 20, I already student voices. So what I did was I created a survey with some questions on it that asked what students liked about iReady, what did they dislike, and things, and what could be improved. And so out of all of the survey responses, 41.1 responses are from fifth graders, about 7% are from fourth graders, 18% are from third graders, and 29 are from second grade. Student voices are important, are very important to staff as we learn from a sample of students' voices were, as I mentioned, were primarily from grades second, third, fourth, and fifth.
Can I probably just request just a name? I don't necessarily need you to come back to me with it or anything, but I would have loved to see like an example of one of the questions.
I've got some in the,
Later.
oh, I got you.
You do, yeah. I
The
think that was like
specific
what-
questions I did not.
Yeah, like what's a question and like, so like I can actually see what are their feelings, what's their perspective versus just who answered it.
Mhm.
And then I think just the thing I would put out there, student voice is so critical. And we have to be really responsible stewards of that voice, right? And I think how we frame it, and so you may have done all this, I just want to say it out loud. How you frame the feedback that you're asking for, particularly around something like this, iReady, that you don't have a lot of control over. It's really important that we're framing that ask for feedback with there's a lot we might not be able to do about this, but we still want your perspective, and we're gonna come back and tell you exactly what we can do and what we can't do based on the information that you've given us. Because I worry that with something like, what is your feelings about iReady? And if they give us information that we have zero control to do anything about, then we're actually eroding our trust with how we tend to and care about their feedback. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And then iReady student voices out of the survey, let's see. Student data perspective, so we broke it down by, we got a pretty good sample of students based on race, which is broken down, and as you can see that predominantly the responses were, we got a good sample from Black and African American students as well as Hispanic and Latino students in there. And I thought that was important to really capture that information. And then I think this might, Director Hoover, in terms of some of the iReady street data highlights, we went ahead and captured some of that here. And so some of the glows makes math and reading fun. They love the games, and then different levels so that it is the right level of challenge. Some grows are too much talking was the responses, and lessons are too long, and then content is too hard. And remember that iReady is also an adaptive test too, so, right? So does iReady help you learn better? Overwhelming majority of students said yes. 39 out of 48 students answered that question.
So who's doing the talking, the iReady or the teacher or the student? Student talking.
And then on the next slide, so just some more sampling of students' comments. It's fun when you're on board and have nothing to do. When you're bored and have nothing to do, you can use iReady and you can play the games. It's a bit of fun. Some things I like about iReady are learning games and rewards. iReady helps kids who have trouble with math and or reading. They give you different lessons based on your level, unlike most learning sources. I hate when they, again, so they're talking a lot. And then I hate how the lessons go slow. So some of the lessons go a little bit too slow for for a student. But I just wanted to share some of those comments. And then on the next slide, there were some more highlights that were captured from student voices. And
A quick question, I guess I'm a little confused, like with this is attached, right? Versus, so like, okay, when they say it helped me learn a lot and they can get on and play games when they're bored, it helps them have fun. Are those
there are games that are embedded within, different things that are embedded.
separate from the test as like an intervention support to get them?
Yes,
test
to
right.
help them,
Thank you.
to help.
I'm really
Some of
sorry.
the games that are on iReady also help motivate students to.
There's three components, right? So we have the curriculum, it's just in math.
Right.
Then we have the test, which does a diagnostic period, and then what they have is little interval, like little mini sessions in between that they can do weekly, just little quick little synopsis to kind of support their learning.
So this data that or this survey that you're asking, were you asking them to think about all three of those things? Or one particular mechanism?
I think it was more targeted on their time that, so each student spends between math and reading 45 minutes a week.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's broke down and they can go on and so as part of their intervention group, or they'll take some time to spend, 5 or 10 minutes on iReady, and iReady is also an adaptive.
Right, yeah.
What are the 7 others who says 39 out of 46 students feel it helps them learn better, the other ones just saying it doesn't do anything for me? Or they just aren't learning better even though they're trying? What does that mean?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
The title says 39 out of 46 students feel iReady helps them learn better, and I'm just focusing on the 7 students that don't feel that it helps them learn better. I guess it's the opposite of that. Do they say anything? Like, I don't like doing it, or it doesn't teach me anything, or I knew it already, or how do we gauge the ones that don't feel like it's helping them? It might be just that, it's not a tool that they like to learn with when they like to learn with other tools, right? But do you have any idea on what's going on with the 7? I know it's not the majority, just curious.
Of course, with any, right, you're gonna have students that are gonna like it, or you're gonna have some students that don't like it, like it.
Yeah.
I guess that's so you did this as a survey, right? You just
Mhm.
gave a piece of paper and they wrote.
No, we set it up electronically, and so
Okay.
in either they were students were provided support so that they could complete it, meaning so some of the questions were read to them and then the teacher would type back for them.
Okay.
If they couldn't, yeah.
So then, yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, another, if you go to Street Data, so if you go, some of their techniques tend to be more on focus groups.
Yeah.
So you can there's a little more back and forth than just, and it's just an idea for maybe, I mean, kind of addressing the students that said they didn't help them learn better. That might be the next follow-up question. Okay, so tell me about that a little bit more. Could be a way to, address some of the, I mean, Street Data has a whole bunch of different techniques for kind of getting down deeper into the subject. So I think this is a great start, but there's some other things. And I guess the other question is the 46 students, that's about 10%. Were they, for example, it sounded like you did make some effort to select like ML students. I mean, the different types of students as opposed to it's all from one. I mean, there's a nice racial distribution, but was there also a distribution in terms of skill levels, in terms of MLL status, in terms of those?
So I asked classroom teachers to pick a diverse group.
Okay,
representation
yeah,
across the, yeah.
Okay.
And then social emotional learning in school climate, anti-racist discipline, ensure disciplinary practices are fair and free from bias, promoting restorative justice. I brought in a copy of the, I think most of you have seen our district referral. It's got an intervention bank on the back of it. So it has prevention for staff to, before submitting a behavioral referral, we believe that students' best chance for academic and social emotional growth, they need to be engaged, they need to be engaged in learning. So what we try to do is we'll go through classroom teachers or staff will go through the intervention bank, pick it and, try to find something on here, because our goal is ultimately behavior is an opportunity to learn, right? I don't believe in, really like punitive practices. I look at learning as learning opportunities, just like academics, right? When I started my career up early on, I had somebody by the name of John Clough, who worked in Seattle, tell me that behavior is academics. And so really giving students those opportunities to learn and being more restorative versus being punitive. So,
Real quick before, this was something that I mentioned at the last board meeting when we were giving presentation around discipline. Just the idea of being free of bias and encouraging that we shift that language just a little bit. Our brains actually can't be free of bias. That's kind of how our brains function. But it's more about mitigating the bias, understanding the bias that's inherent, and addressing the behaviors that often come as a result of that bias. So just a small language change that I think honors our brains a little bit better. Well, I guess one kind of question, and you might get to it if you do. You mentioned at the beginning, so like referrals are down, looks like exclusionary practices are down, which is really great. That's all really good signs. When you notice trends and then you have conversations amongst the team, I'm kind of like curious what those conversations are like and how those are centering anti-racist practices. Specifically, again, like, do you talk about bias? Do teachers or staff take those times to reflect on and to reflect on where their biases might have shown up? Is there a time when they name those biases? Like what is that conversation like? Can you give me kind of
like in terms of conversation that a student has had, that a teacher is having with a student regards to a type of.
no, when you're looking at like discipline data, right?
Okay.
Because you had said like, you know, we're noticing, if we notice a trend, right? Where if we're noticing a trend that, you know, either these specific kids or a specific group of kids or this identity group is being referred more. What's the conversation that happens that really centers that anti-racist practice? Is it reflective? Again, going back to the system, oftentimes it might be, okay, yeah, I need to reflect on how I have a bias against whatever, right? So I guess, yeah, like what might the conversation of the team be like? Can you help me out? Get to a better question.
The bigger court, I mean, if I can help, I might just make it worse because I'm known to do that too. So when we look at slide 28. In staff meeting, and staff see this, what is the conversation
Thank you.
amongst the staff when we address those variables? And it may not be biases, but
Yeah.
From being a teacher, it's usually how does our anti-racist policy affect when, as a frontline teacher, you're dealing with students, you're not dealing with data, you're dealing with students. And you see it's, 17 kids on one, 15 on the other, 3 on the other. So in staff meeting, we're actually probably navigating Billy, Steve, Bob, Sally, Sue. But what is the conversation? Because the numbers are drastically obvious. And so I think I hear Director Hoover saying, what is the conversation amongst ourselves? And when we're faced with these numbers, how does it trickle down to how we handle whatever his or her or their issue is, or has been, or with the care team, or what has been our approach where exclusionary numbers tend to be around this demographic as opposed to that demographic? What are the variables and how we approach it? So now I'm feeding the answer, but I think Director Hoover wants to know what's the conversation around that, and we have to look at that chart. And I don't mean us, I mean in the staff.
I think one of the things we always look at are how are we approaching the situation or the behavior, right? And one of the things I think we do a really good job at is looking at, the impact of behavior. To me, our discipline data is, I mean, overall, there's about a 10% over, you know, this graph shows on 28 that there's a 10% overrepresented, in terms of, Black and Latino Hispanic students. I feel like we do a really good job of when a behavior infraction or comes out where a student is struggling with something, we have conversations with students about, you know, what could you have done differently? And we coach students and work with them on better ways to approach the situation if something came up.
Do we have the same kind of dialogue with the staff?
What's that?
Do we have that same kind of dialogue with the staff? Like, I mean, can you say, hey, what might you have done differently? Let's
I
think a
most
little bit
certainly
about how
think
you
that there are
responded to it.
yeah, I most certainly think that there are times that we've had conversations, or I've had conversations with staff members over, you know, what is something that we could have done differently?
But that's not maybe the norm when you're talking about, okay,
I would say that that's accurate,
okay.
but it has come up in conversation. Am I answering your question? I kind of,
So what I wanna know. Not to put you on the spot, but this is a conversation.
This is what these repetitions.
Yeah, so you spent all this time doing this.
Hold on, he's in my district, y'all ain't bullying my.
Weird. But I wanna hear, so for example, here's an opportunity, right? You spent all this time creating these data sheets, right? Like, so what I would like to know is, what are you gonna do with this and bringing this back to your staff? Like, what's your plan, like, to do that? Because I think every time, like, if you invest in something, right, to create something, it shouldn't just be for the board, right? It should actually be for your school community. So I wanna hear what your plan is, because it is, I get it from a principal perspective, you know, like when the incident happens, right, everyone just wants it to stop.
Yeah.
Calm down, like, everyone just wants it all calm. You want the adults calm, and want the kids calm, like, I get that, right? And at that moment, everyone's like, everyone's escalated, that's not always the best time to go, so what did you do? That is not the best time.
Never.
So, but the best times are like the situation, you've spent all this time creating these data sets. And you have staff meetings, like, or your MTSS meetings, like, what is the opportunity to really think through, okay, let's look at this data. What are we gonna do about this? What do we see? What do you guys see? Like, I would love to hear what your plan is.
well, one of the conversations I had with Stacy Lappin from Vermont Partners when we were looking at the data, was we did talk about the 10% that are overrepresented in this. And so our next steps would be to have conversations centered around what could we do differently with those students that are identified within that 10%.
Can I ask you one more question?
Of course.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Do you feel that your staff is able to look at this data and really reflect on themselves in terms of like, or do you think that's work that still is needing to be done to sort of like hold up the mirror point? We call it when we talk about, you know, when we talk about, you know, the 4 pivots, like the mirror work, right? Or emotional responsive teaching. Like, are they able to do the mirror work?
I think my staff as a whole have been doing a really good job at being able to really embrace some of the behavior and use that as a learning opportunity. I think most certainly we can have some more conversations around this 10% that's overrepresented in this slide. I've been the principal there this is my 3rd year, and I definitely feel that we have over the last 3 years have significantly reduced the number of referrals, suspensions. And my approach to behavior is really, it's about learning, and that, it's our jobs as shapers to give kids the tools that they need to be successful. So I don't necessarily look at behavior as something that is, and my staff as well, that we look at those as learning opportunities.
That's what I want to chime in, you said that, and I support that. I think I hear the question for the inquiry, is there a question that when you look at the data that jumps out from the page amongst the staff, is if Blacks and Brown are being referred more often, what is the learning modal that we have to challenge ourselves? As Director Larson said, i.e. his first performance systemically, Or is it, two students who have some issues that were referrals are repetitive? Or, and I think Director Hoover wanted to hear as a fly on the wall, what are the conversation? And that would have been a good place, but a lot of times there's a kid with a certain approach and how we're handling it, or what, the fly on the wall conversation is. And for me, I would shift to my conversation, is we still have to report to the community that even though the bars are lower than before, there are two demographics that still jump off at the page, and how do we answer that?
Yeah.
It can't always land in the lap of the students, so what's the fly on the wall conversation? For behavior is opportunity to learn. What is the conversation for the learning for the educators?
Yeah.
As we deal with this, and this is a consistent pattern, not just Tukwila, not just District Four, everywhere. And what is the fly on the wall conversation? And it could be as simple as we have, I don't want to answer the question. I think the bottom of the question is, what is the conversation amongst the professionals?
Yeah.
And what is our talking points to the community? We spend a lot of time, equity, investing in anti-racist policy, and the data still is consistent. So then, at a certain point, we're gonna ask a question, and I just, as a representative for your district, you, my school, what do you want me to tell? Conversation.
I do think it's important to highlight, right, that we do have that 10%, right? And we most certainly could be doing better, but I also want to point out that we're at a 43% reduction of referrals this time last year. So I think it's, continuing to have those conversations centering on this. And how we're approaching students of color, right, when things come up, and what skills are we bringing into the conversation, and how we address the behavior.
And you said you brought that form, can I see the one, the referral form?
Oh, yeah.
I think this is certainly bigger than Thorndike, certainly, this just happens to be where this is coming up. Mr. Cole, so I want to name that. I think one of the things that, yes, we can acknowledge, we can celebrate, right, that pattern is shifting. That's great. I think one of the things, and this made me just be getting too in the weeds, right, of wanting to know what that reflective conversation is like, because ultimately you can do some things that might mitigate these numbers, but is that creating long-term behavior change in our educators so that 5 years from now, we're not reiterating, we're not seeing these high numbers again, right? So it's not always just enough that we're seeing that downward trend, but what does that mean in terms of behavior change for the long term? And that's where it's like anti-racist work is hearts and minds work, right? And that's where that mirror work is so important, because if we're just talking about the number on the page and then the student that represents that number, that's great. And that might help that student in that situation in this time that we're in. But what does this mean for me as an educator in the long term? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So again, bigger than Thorndike, that's kind of why I was curious, like, I think I just like to be a fly on the wall to hear what those conversations are like, and then continue to encourage and build up skill, both in your leadership and facilitating those conversations, and in our educators. Reflecting on ourselves is hard, really uncomfortable, particularly when we're talking about things that I don't want to be seen as, I'm not a racist, right? But like, so when we're confronted with the need to really look and unlearn some of those things, right? That takes this, it takes really intentional time, but facilitated support, right? Reflection on all of those different things. And so like at the end of the day, I actually really, really care more about that, because that's what's going to create the long-term behavior change and keep these stats down, right? Anyway, there's no red.
Just a question from me before I move on. When I look at these numbers, I know they aren't. To me, they're not right across the population any more than I believe the numbers, when I look at prison, numbers, are proportional right across, all races. And so when I see these things happening, I worry that some people are disciplined more often than others. I worry that, students are in a situation where they are frustrated in the learning environment, and so they're starting to act out. I worry what's going on, at home with family. There's a lot of conditions going on here. And I know some favored students get a lecture and sit in the corner, some favored students just get a pipe down, and some get sent to the office, right? And so, and that has a lot of racism built into it. I'm just gonna say it out loud, right? It has been for a long, long time. So when you look at these numbers, you've heard a lot of conversation here. Just at the surface, what do you, because you have a great education and experience, what do you think your approach is to driving these numbers to a lot more flatline than I see here?
Well, that's a good question, and I think as part of I'm putting together or starting the process of putting together a summer intensive for staff, and that would be one of the things we could do some work with Belong partners on how we can look at the ways that we're approaching just behavior, right? And again, I think I don't want to minimize the 10% because as long as there's any percentage, it's too much, right? But I think as a school, as a whole, we most certainly have work that we need to do. And I think we do we could be doing better, right? And I think it's more targeted professional development that really that calls this in. And so that to me would be and the next step for me would be to have some discussion during building leadership. And then also I'm doing some work with Belong partners and looking at ways that we can even bring that lower.
Right.
And our goal would always be to try to get to 0.
Humans are involved, we get it. Thank you.
And we actually think it's great that you reduce significantly the
100%.
100%. So I just wanted to make sure. But it's just about all of us, like continuous improvement means, like, okay, you did all of this, you did this now, digging in a little deeper.
And I think the conversation for me got me thinking about that 10% and how we can bring that down, right, as a school. Because as long as there's any percentage, is a concern.
But I just want to speak to how powerful it is. Because part of me, as a professional, says, I would rather the number be high and consistent across the board than low and still high for this demographic. Because it's easier to fix if the numbers were high and everybody's impacted rather equally, then we say, we're probably handling some things different. But to say we lowered it to 40%, but then there's still these two demographics that are higher in relationship to where the others are lower. That speaks to some other stuff. That speaks to, hey, whatever we're doing to lower the number 52% is working here. But its impact in these two is different. And then we gotta, that says there's something else. That says there's something else. And we know historically, it's we can go down the list. I'm just saying, as much as I want to celebrate the 42%, it's kind of like my grandfather used to say, well, when the Great Depression hit, we had to read about it in the paper. Black folks been broke so long, we didn't know, they just knew we had company now. Right, because it impacts us, it hits us different. So I want to challenge us to look at that, yes, the numbers are down, but the fact that this demographic doesn't drop as drastic as the other means we've got some work to do that may be not as obvious.
So to that point, the one thing I would suggest, so you have trends for the, the overall, maybe we should also have trends for that 10% gap. Is that shrinking every year? So track that over time. The other suggestion I was gonna put up and is, again, breaking down by gender. I mean, we know, for example, in one of our other schools that boys are getting disproportionately, suspended. And so that may be another, as we dive down into it, look at what's going on with that side of it as well.
Point, thank you.
The only thing I want to add, just quickly is what can we as a board help you to hit these numbers? I think sometimes we hammer on, we want to see the success, but if there's something, you don't have to tell us now, email it or something, but also, I mean, we're coming up on another set of looking at the budget, et cetera. I heard Belong Partners a couple times, you were saying, and I know that that's been kind of scaled back and some different things, so please consider if there's something we can do to help this number move along that you see to let us know.
Last year, we had a social emotional interventionist that was a big part of our team. We don't have that support this year. I know we're looking at some things for next year. But I most certainly want to acknowledge that we can always be doing better, and that I really appreciate the conversation centered around this today, and we'll be doing some reflecting on how we can, as a school, bring that even down lower.
I think that what you said, like, I was going to bring all of our social emotional support specialists back 100%. And even without that person, you've seen decreases, right? So it's not as if the success was related to that person, right? And so, well, yeah, okay, I hear that. Anyway, so I just wanted, we saw that same with like the increase in some of the stats we were looking at Foster High School, right? We thought, we were worried, right? And it doesn't mean that that work still had to happen, right? So someone still was doing that, right? But what that shows is that we actually can do, we don't have to be in this deficit mindset. Without this person, we're gonna lose all the momentum that we've been having. And so that tells me if we're able, at some point, probably not this year, we'll be realistic about that, but in 3 years from now, we're able to bring those SEL interventions back, great. That's just gonna propel our continued success in this area, right?
And I think if we do bring them back, it would be really, really taking a look at this type of data and really being intentional about what supports we're putting in place to help continue to bring that down.
I have to think the type of qualities we want in that intervention. For example, we want somebody who is also a multilingual speaker, or maybe with an inclusionary lens, like those are the things that we can talk about. Like, if we do bring it back, how do we make sure that it's the person that can really support some of that mitigating for bias conversations, right? And support in that area too, right? Because that's what this is really.
And I think thinking about that in advance, I mean, so when money does come in, I think money tends to come in and then we kind of, what do we do with it? Well, if you do that work, you will know what we're going to do with it.
Really great. And then the next slide is, again, is exclusionary discipline by race. And so, again, going back to the conversation, so there is disproportionality here in terms of the number of suspensions. And relatively speaking, I getting that to 0 is ideal. And I want, or sisters, let me rephrase that. Exclusionary practices is anything that is 15 minutes or more. When a student is removed from a learning environment for more than 15 minutes, it's considered an exclusionary practice. So I thought I'd bring that up. Okay. And then our attendance has been close to 90%. Right now, I think we're hovering about 88% based on the latest P223 count. And so I attribute, again, a lot of that to our care team, Miss Lewis, our attendance secretary, Julie Hurd, who works with our our families who are receiving services through McKinney-Vento.
Is it like an average, Michael? It's an average daily attendance kind of?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I do, and I do have some information, in terms of MB, coming up on another slide, so, and I'll just touch on it real briefly now. Our attendance and discipline is, higher than the state average, which is really good. So one thing that tells me is that our students like coming to school, right? And so that's, I just.
Just the one side of this doesn't show, this is not chronically absent students.
This is,
just average.
this is our overall.
Yeah, so
daily attendance.
there's two lenses you can look at attendance through, and I think both of them need to be,
Mhm.
because if we have some students, a chunk of students that are chronically absent,
Yeah,
then we pretty much know that's gonna impact your academics.
yeah, and those students, we just had an attendance meeting where Chief Whitback was, with us, and talking about how are we addressing those, students that do have, are experiencing chronic absenteeism. Okay, and then, slide 31 is, the PBS tiered fidelity inventory. It provides a valid, reliable, and effective measure of the, to the extent of which school staff are applying the core features to positive behavior interventions. Last year, when we did the tiered fidelity inventory, the TFI, it was me that was doing, I did it as part of our, school improvement process. This year, we don't have an SEL person, which was part of that process a little bit last year, but this year we turned it over to the PBS team, and they, which is really good because it's a team effort instead of one person doing the work. So,
You're gonna have to explain these numbers to me, because I have no idea what they are.
okay, so, all right. So the data measures, the TFI tool measures how effective our systems across all three tiers are. And then,
So it's 10 high, just for like framing.
in terms of support, let me, hang on one second. Because I went through this with, because I asked for clarification when we were going through this. I wanted to be super clear because I knew there would be some questions centered around this. So team refers to the composition, let's see.
And for PBIS, everyone, PBIS stands for positive behavioral intervention supports. That's what it means. Yeah, no acronyms.
So,
So-
Dave, Director Larson, in terms of the numbers, okay, so for example, in tier one, so the teams, there were, 2 people last year, and then this year we have 1.5. I guess this is just highlighting, the number of things that were like, so for implementation, we implemented 7 strategies last year versus 9 this year, and then evaluation 3 and 5. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not 10 is the highest, because I think each one of these is a different thing.
Right.
So.
Right, and the scores that are calculated for each one of the areas are based on multiple questions.
Right.
Okay, that's helpful.
Question for you, even though the individual deciphering seems challenge right now, has it improved? Overall, what you're trying to show us, have we improved in the full year over last year, or do we need to do
I
more?
would I would definitely say we still have work to do. Again, it's doing more with less, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of doing that. And this year, as I mentioned earlier, last year, the tiered fidelity inventory was, I did that with with some help with our SEI. And so it wasn't totally me, but this year, the PBIS team actually took on this work. And so that's really different. Instead of having one person or two people who were a team of people that were responsible for carrying out the inventory.
Okay.
I'm not sure that this necessarily is particularly useful for us. I mean, the purpose of PBIS and all this is to, hopefully, the outcomes will show up in student exclusions and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure this level of detail. I mean, I tried to look this up online and got confused fairly quickly about what it is. So I'm not, this may be useful for you internally to figure out how, implementing PBIS better, which is a strategy that you do to help to get rid of less behavior problems.
The intention was to really highlight that we did conduct the tiered fidelity inventory, right? And it is a process to complete that. And I wanted to highlight that the PBS team did complete that, which was completed in January and February.
And then does this actually give them information that they're utilizing? Because if it is a cumbersome process that we're not really making meaning out of, why are we doing it?
It helps us identify the things that we need, the supports that we need to put in place. Like, so for example, one of the questions that students were asked, do you know what a Thorndike thank you is? Which are little cards that we give students to identify they're part of our rewards, our school-wide reward system. And then one of the other questions was, do you know what are the three behaviors identified within a Thorndike thank you? Being safe, responsible, and respectful. And so we looked at how many students were able to answer those questions. And so that gives us an indication of, based on what feedback we got from students, information tells us, okay, we need to reteach the 3 or
It's a culture survey,
yeah.
kind of. So this is another, so the wording of this, I think, was really confusing to me. It says the Thorndike PBS team took leadership to complete the TFI, but it sounds like it was really on the onus of students.
Well, students were part of it. And then there's our questions that staff are asked as well.
Maybe that could be in a future where we get some more information on PBIS as a whole, potentially. Perhaps we can add that to our board tracking document.
And it's tied to Swiss also, which this doesn't necessarily, but those two, Swiss is kind of one of the measures that you, so getting that all presented in one package would be nice, so
Yeah.
it ties things together.
So in general, with limited resources, you gathered this data and what did you conclude?
It identified specific areas that and if you're looking at a true PBS school, for example, it identifies areas where we are strong, that we're doing well, and areas that we need to grow or we need to be doing better.
And your high level assessment is, are you doing pretty good? Are there serious areas?
I think we're doing, the way that I'll answer that question is I think we could be doing better, for
Okay.
sure.
And it looks like, particularly at the tier 3, which is the most intensive, as evaluation goes down, score plans goes down, so maybe that indicates that needs some work. Which, those are the tier 3 students, those are the ones that are most likely to get exclusionary.
Which are 3 to 5% of students, so that in tier 3 interventions, right? One-on-one instructional interventions or very small intensive small groups
Right.
for social emotional support, behavior intervention plans, wraparound supports for students and families. Mental health, right? So our school social worker, Kimberly Goodman, we pair up with community-based organizations that provide mental health services. And we have, for example, therapists that actually come into Thorndike and work with students.
Is that the only school that's happening?
The tiered fidelity, at least is through this process, yes. We don't, it's not a district-wide initiative, it's cost us money to do that with, it's through it's not DSD.
We did it, we have I have the binder, right? So we
Yeah.
have the protocols and
Yeah, they
so we.
wanted us to do that, but we're working to.
We did,
Yeah.
so that worked through, Stacy Lappin with Warren Partners helped support that work.
I mean, PBIS has been around in this district for years. The question always, which is always hard for me to get, is how much are we doing it? I mean, we're saying it's there, but are we implementing it with fidelity or a little bit,
Yeah.
not too much?
I think that there, in terms of resources, right,
Yeah.
we're doing the best that we can. And, again, the tiered fidelity inventory identifies some of the things that we're doing
It's
well.
about your system again.
Yeah,
It's about your
systems.
systems, yeah. It gives you feedback on, it's an analysis on the system and how's the system actually supporting positive behavioral supports, right? The only thing just to keep in mind, and this is the part about bias, right, is when I did this work in the past, is when you have a bunch of teachers that don't reflect the student body and they're designing positive behavioral supports, that's inherently, they're creating a system of bias, right? So that's the thing, that's why the race conversation and the culture conversations have to keep happening. Because you have to mitigate for that, because it's by design, right? So I'm just saying that's the conversation. Because I, going to school, and I went to Stanford, Washington, I have my construct of how students should behave based on my experience in Stanford, Washington. But if I have a child from Ethiopia who actually was in a refugee camp, you know what I mean? It's a totally different experience. So how do you really mitigate for that? Like that's why you have the culture and the culture responsiveness conversations from the beginning, from the design aspect, because if you're creating PPI systems and all your experience is this system, then you're gonna perpetuate bias in decisions. So that's why this conversation is great, is to have that conversation around, so how do you take this data back and say, okay, we learned something, we created it, but we need to mitigate for this, because it's still coming out this way, so, it's just a unique opportunity, and that's part of the reasons why racial equity leads are part of the design work on some of these goals and things, so, anyway. I'm sure you're having staff meetings and conversations, and I know Stacy talks about this all the time as well, but I think it's an opportunity, right? So, yeah, because that's how you go back and redesign the system, like, okay, the system's not working right now. Let's go back and look at for these two groups, what did we not get in these two groups, or this one group, or however we do that, so, but yeah, that's my 2 cents on PBIS. Because you're designing it together, and so you have to make sure you mitigate for that in the design process.
Okay, on to slide 32, language acquisition, progress and learning to support MLL students. Slide 33, so Project LAT at Thorndike. So as part of our school improvement process, we identified a problem of practice with PLCs and how that time was being utilized to support learning. And so one of the things that we looked at is doing a PLC relaunch this year. And so a lot of that work was done during staff planning time. It was optional. So we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dates, one more to go in terms of that. So refresher PDs as a whole staff, and during grade level PLCs, topics covered were you can see were mind maps, cooperative paragraphs, chants, and pictorials. So you can see an example from Ms. Hendricks' second grade class, Ms. Parsons' third grade class, and Ms. Adams' kindergarten class. I will say that one of the things I've noticed when I've gone in to do classroom two observations with classroom teachers, they are observed twice during the year, at least twice a year. And I can definitely see a huge difference with the way that the GLAD strategies are being employed in the classroom to support our SML students. So.
And I heard that you emphasized that in your instructional rounds with the team, that was a big emphasis from the work, so nice work.
Thank you. And so, on slide 34, so, Thorndike's MLL, multilingual learner program, 54% of students who receive MLL support are progressing toward proficiency. MLL team, which I mentioned earlier, Sarah Skateworth and Sharon Shipman, are pushing into classrooms and collaboratively teaching, K through 5, kindergarten through 5th grade, with a large focus on reading and with writing. I can break down the levels of proficiency and what they mean, but for the purpose, I just wanted to highlight here that we have over 200, I think the last number is like 202 MLL students at Thorndike. And recently, we hired another FTE that'll be split between Thorndike and Tukwila Elementary, which we're looking forward to having that person start. So we're really excited about the work that we're doing. And I can definitely say that, and confidently telling you that, our MLL team, Sharon Shipman and Sarah Skipworth are doing a really great job of doing that push-in model at Thorndike.
I got a chance to visit, for a morning.
That's pretty, yeah.
And I was absolutely blown away impressed with how well the teachers are integrating everybody who have different levels. And we're able to nimbly, I think somebody just reminded her, she had Spanish, but somebody wanted Portuguese up there, and boom, up it went. And kids would respond at the board better than I've seen adults present at corporations, in their language through a translation. It was just very, very impressive. They were highly engaged, and I think that's hard. So I was, really busting my buttons with pride when I saw that activity going on. I think there's a lot of good coming out of this approach to teaching.
And we're, as a school, I believe our entire staff is really doing some great work. And we're looking at ways that we can better serve students. I'm excited to have the 0.5 FTE starting, so we can get some more supports in for our MLL students.
Do you have a goal for improving the 54%? Is that last year's number or this year's number?
So this data, this is data from, the WIDA data won't be coming out until May.
So do you have a goal so 54 is last year and
Director Larson, I'm not sure what you're asking.
because at a district level, we have a goal for increasing the number of students that are progressing.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, do you have a goal for increasing the 54% to something higher as a school goal?
So 54% of students are receiving, so 54% of students
Are progressing.
are progressing, right?
Yeah,
They-
the
they're-
question is, do you have a goal at Thorndike that connects to the district's goal? So do you have a goal at Thorndike around a percentage of students who are progressing? So that's the number that's current.
Right,
What is your goal if you have one?
we don't have a specific goal.
I would say, Sarah Skipper, she was at Cascade Youth for last year.
She's
Yeah,
amazing.
I can tell you, she's really good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We were happy to have her back for sure. And that position was open for quite a while to try to find the right fit, so. And then slides 35 through 36, serving students and families through McKinney-Vento. We are continuing to monitor our students who receive McKinney-Vento services. According to the latest OSPI Washington State report card, Thorndike students are receiving MV services. I brought this up earlier, have a higher rate of daily attendance and lower discipline rate than the state average. So I think that is something to definitely celebrate. And then For the current school year, 88% of those students are attending school on a daily basis as of March of this year.
And I think we can have a shout out to two groups for that. The McKinney-Vento would be high attendance, and that is the McKinney-Vento engagement coordinators and also the transportation environment for making that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's
That's
it's
a
a lot.
non-trivial, that's a non-trivial thing to make that happen.
Yeah, it's a lot of work behind the scenes to do that. They do a good job.
And then slide 37 is lessons learned this year, and then next steps. I'm going to share a little about those lessons learned this school year and next steps for Thorndike. Key lessons learned this year, students can be successful, like having that attitude, like all students can be successful is really important. When adults are implementing systems of support and believe students are capable and can be successful, students will be successful. We've seen this with our multi-year trend in iReady data. PLC work, I talked about that a little bit earlier. And tension with PLCs is making a difference with practice. The PLC relaunch and training has been supportive of intentional teaching, teacher planning and learning walks. I've seen increased use of GLAD strategies, as I mentioned earlier, directly tied to our intentionality with PLCs. And then push and support. Students who are multilingual are being served in a push and model. We've established a system where teachers of multilingual learners are engaged in co-planning and co-teaching with classroom teachers as part of our push and model. And then opportunities, we're using discipline as an opportunity to learn. We are teaching students how to engage and learn from life. We're using discipline situations as opportunity to teach students about how to engage with each other using proactive and restorative practices as learning experiences, as I talked a little bit about earlier. And then slide 39, next steps. We can monitor and respond to the Center for Educational Effectiveness, our CE data that we do usually in the mid to late spring. We'll be administering the annual school and climate survey with CE using this data to inform continued next steps and beliefs in and partnership in supporting our students. My understanding is, Dr. Pedroza, that'll be looking a little bit different this year.
Not this year, but next year.
Next year.
Looking at changing.
Okay. And then PLC work developing a summer intensive for adults. So I've just started looking at that process and what we can do. And I think during that summer intensive, having some conversation centered around behaviors and how that's how the adults are approaching it. I think through this conversation, that was a big takeaway for me. So I'm going to bring that back in to my team and look at how we can incorporate doing some of that work over the summer. One of the things I did ask for is getting a tentative district calendar for the upcoming August dates. That would be really helpful as I'm in the beginning stages of looking at using some lab and lab high poverty dollars to support the summer intensive. And then 3, push and supports, building capacity around collective implementation as part of our MTSS model. We'll engage in strategies that will support collective implementation from an equity-based perspective for student success. And then opportunities, continue to develop consistent systems for restorative discipline. As a staff, we all own our behavior supports and expectations. We are continuing to cultivate readiness for ownership of this collective capacity, which I think is part of that conversation that we engaged in earlier. And that's all I have.
So one question down here, if it's okay. The translation devices, why can't I think of the name?
Oh, the Pocket Talks.
Yeah, I know Children's Foundation is interested in following up with the school district. To help out with that. Do you feel you're probably the most prevalently supplied school.
Well, we got
Do you think you have enough
We got a donation from.
Another school,
the-
actually.
Yeah, from
So explain it to them.
Pine Lake Middle School, which is a partnership that's been established with Thorndike for a very long time. And so with that donation, we were able to supply all of our staff members who wanted a Pocket Talk, which we were able to employ to all of our staff. And then the additional devices were provided to at the district level with our technology department, who have been employing those devices. I believe for staff who have been requesting them. So I think at least, I want to say 30 devices went over to the technology department.
And I remember we were piloting these like just a little over a year ago. And just from the Children's Foundation, they were interested in helping. And I remember the superintendent telling us we're testing it and figuring it out. So I wonder, just from a public point of view, are you thinking it's successful? Do you want to continue with those particular devices? Do you seek and want outside help in, I guess, purchasing and increasing inventories?
Can I just say something first?
Totally, it's a question for you.
Yeah, no, so we piloted it and we created guidance along with it, and not just for Pocket Talks, but any technical device. And the question is, so that there's a tension, right? We want students to be engaged in talking, like that's what we want, right? The devices are, there's, there's the 4 levels, there's listening, there's understanding and listening, there's speaking, there's writing, there's reading. The Pocket Talks help with comprehension and understanding like little tasks and things like that. But what we don't want to do is have them be, we need to actually start, in the very beginning for newcomers, they're useful, but as they start to get out of that, we need to start using our students more in pushing them to practice their language. So it is a little bit of a tough thing. Do I want a Pocket Talk in every classroom for every teacher with it? No, I don't. It's not appropriate for every classroom. But do I think that we can have some, like definitely the office staff should have them, social workers should have them. If you have a child crying in front of you and you don't know why they're crying, like you have to have those to understand so you can help meet their needs. But when you're taking an instructional classroom, I just think that it's for me, I think having students listen to really rich material reading and understanding language and, but when they're like thinking about processing or they're working on some sort of really highly complex issue, a Pocket Talk might be useful. So I think it's something that it's not either or,
Right.
it's a yes and, but to put it in everyone's hands, it's then you have, you're running the risk of actually setting some of our kids back.
Yeah.
In all honesty.
So the other way, I know some teachers got like students choose as well, on the release side of it. The other interesting thing about I just had a session where somebody was doing dynamic translation on the fly using ChatGPT.
Mhm.
So that's another, alternative. I mean, there's all kinds of
There's
technology.
so many tools.
Yeah.
It's part of one piece of guidance for all of, there's Google Translate. There's a ChatGPT. I could right now go into ChatGPT and say, translate this thing for, I could do that. So there's so many tools. And like any tool, you have to be thoughtful about how you use them, right? And I think that's the thing. So I'm not going to invest in like getting 200 Pocket Talks for every teacher.
Right.
But I want to make sure, for example, our MLO teachers have access to them, our office staff, our social workers, and then thinking about, and if that is the investment, but some of our teachers actually use them too, so. But it's not the thing. I know it was the thing that was highlighted in the newspaper article, but it's not the only thing, so.
Right, I was just curious if there's a trend or if we're falling in with different new capabilities from other sources. Or is it a thing that's desired, or we have enough? I have no feel for. It sounds like you don't want full saturation, because that makes them dependent on the devices, and I appreciate.
Well, there's also money issues there. But
Yeah,
I think, Michael's been great because he, once we've worked through some of these things, Michael gave, like you said, some of them went to IT. We have some, used some of them for other places. I'm not getting, honestly, I don't think we're getting a huge, like, a school demand for Pocket Talks. We're not getting that.
okay,
So I would just say, let's just continue using them until the new Pocket Talks version comes out, or the new Google Translate, or the new AI, whatever comes out, like whatever the new you think is gonna be. We'll know Pocket Talks will be old in probably a year or two, so
Yeah.
You know, but we have the tools, so let's use them. And as long as they're following the guidance and using them, you know, thoughtfully and carefully with kids, it's fun. If it's useful and it's helping, I know it makes a difference for comprehension for kids. If I was sitting there trying to do cognitive math, like a really strong algebra problem, and I was struggling with what a teacher was saying, to really do the task well, it's gonna be useful. Yeah, absolutely.
They weren't fully dependent upon it, but it was really
Yeah.
impressive to see how
Yeah.
it helped.
And I saw that too, when I was in a classroom, I think you and I were in a classroom, Michael, where we were, I think, I can't remember what grade level, but the teacher had it very careful, like, they had it for certain situations. And I saw it, you know, the teacher was teaching the lesson, and then they had a student that they saw was struggling, and so the student, and they also taught the students how to access it themselves too. So I thought, what I saw was appropriate engagement around the topic.
And one of the other things too, in terms of like when we see productive struggle, it's when we're observing that it's not, the go-to isn't just to grab the pocket top device out. So we want students to be able to have those opportunities.
So the one question I have about, so I noticed when we were looking at the financial reports that Thorndike is the only school that is reporting using the OSSI dollars. I'm curious what you're using the OSSI dollars for. And the reason I ask is because the legislature has that on the chopping block. And so I'm trying to, you know, keep that, so I'm curious. what you're
Yeah,
using it for.
so I think one of the areas of problem practice was identifying how to best how to help give teachers additional strategies during PL, like utilizing that time during PLCs. And one of the things that we have focused on is GLAD strategies this year. So working with, because we do have a high FLL student population. And so some of that work is, some of the OSSI funds have been used for that. Also, some of the work that we've done that we've centered around school climate and culture. That's been historically a pretty, it's been a challenge at Thorndike, and so really turning the school climate and cultures, and we are doing some really great work, and it is turning around. So I'm really curious to see what the CE data is going to look like this year coming out. But we're using some of that money, those funds for additional work with the Belong partners. Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, but before I wrap up, I just want to thank the board of directors for letting me present today. I also want to thank the students and families and staff at Thorndike for supporting the work that we do each day. I want to give a big shout out to Hannah Venero, who's been our OSPI continuous improvement partner with school improvement. She's been amazing. Again, I've mentioned Stacy Lappin a few times. She's been a really great resource to have for our building, and so very fortunate. Our MTSS coach, Adam Scar, our LMLL interventionist and ASP, Sarah Skipworth and Sharon Shipman, for their collaboration support of students at Thorndike. And then our leadership team, Sarah Henderson, Morgan Music, Stephanie Aragon, Julie Valentine, Sarah Skipworth again, and Adam Scar for their teacher leadership. And I'm only as good as the people I support. I feel very blessed to be in the position that I'm in. We've come a long way in the last couple of years. It's definitely been a journey. And so I just want to thank all of you for taking the time for me to be able to present.
So that was, yeah, that's part of the OSSI. I mean, you're getting that because of OSSI.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's another piece of that. Okay, thanks.
I want to thank you. Yeah, it's always hard to come into these spaces and, you know, get the questions, but that's the work session, the purpose of a work session, the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's always hard because they're asking you a question, you're like, you know, all of that, it's challenging. But thank you for coming in here. Thank you for being a growth mindset person. Michael and I, when we talked last year, I kept telling him that his third year would be way calmer than it was his second year. He said, I don't believe you. Yeah, it's true.
And I will say honestly, through this process, it's really given me an opportunity to dive into the data a little bit differently than I have in the past. So I not only presenting to you today, but also there were some learnings for me going through this process, which I think was really important. And also some of the productive dialogue that we had in terms of things that we need to look into and how we can better support students. It's, you know, it's an ongoing journey. And again, thank you.
I think it's
Good work.
All right, next we'll move to the board goal discussion. Really thinking about how we can build some things and put some things in place to help support the current board and future board in just being able to understand and navigate budget things as they happen. To hopefully prevent binding conditions once again in the future. Great, so Ms. Fleming.
It's my turn. Unfortunately, it's a lot more dry than the previous presentation. So I apologize for that because it's, you know, numbers and everything else. So I just want to start off, I always provide, our strategic plan and the anti-racist goals. So that's kind of our cornerstone. I won't go into those. So our agenda today is just to go through the fiscal oversight goals. So it's to review our current board policy 6022. I know that there's been discussion about maybe making some changes to that. To be between, I know there was discussion between 4% and 8%. There's also been discussion at keeping at 6%. So I'm providing some examples of other school board policies so that we can just have that conversation. So it was a lot of information that I kind of threw at you, but I'll go through them, won't read them verbatim, but I'll just kind of go through and explain more in detail. The second item was the board handbook and some budget guidelines. So in trying to develop some guidelines for the board handbook, I think it's really important that we have some conversations about our current financial reports that we provide. The data that's in there is pretty stagnant and it doesn't provide you a lot of information so that you can really kind of hone in and see information. So what I did was I did some research for other school districts for some of the data that they provide to their boards to see if it might be something that you would be interested in seeing. I did not prepare the data for Tukwila because it will take a period of time to develop that information. It's not hard, it's just very time consuming. So I didn't obviously have time to provide a Tukwila sample of what that would look like. So I just pulled information.
What, you're not swimming in time?
No.
It's because you took that vacation.
The third item on your list is the report showing the staff versus student count over time. So I've provided a couple of pieces of information on that. OSPI financial indicators, providing that review. So what I did was I pulled our most recent OSPI financial indicator and then provided you kind of the behind the scenes of what goes into that. And so it's a discussion of, is it important for you all to see? And then last is the annual report showing certificated and administrative staff costs covered by the state versus our local levies. And so, again, it's just some examples. So on page 4, our current board policy is up here. Basically, it is the 6% of the district's budgeted general fund revenue. So I want to be mindful of that. It is on revenue. The examples that you will see, every other example that I came across is on expenditures. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. We're the only district in King and Pierce County that uses revenue. All other school districts use expenditures. So I'm just throwing that out there, just as an observation. We don't have to change it. I'm just throwing it out there for something to maybe talk about and consider. It does say in our current board policy that, I guess I didn't put that in there, but I think we're supposed to have a plan that we provide to you if we went below the percentage of the fund balance, I can't recall, but, I think that was in there.
Yeah.
When I was doing the review, I was really surprised. I found 3 districts in our, surrounding area that don't have a minimum fund balance policy.
Wow.
Which I found kind of fascinating because I know that the auditors look at that. And so that's one of the things that they always say is that you should have a minimum fund balance policy. So the fact that there's 3 districts in our surrounding Puget Sound area that don't have one was a little bit alarming.
Are they
to
really
me.
lucky districts? Can I pause and ask, I wanna,
Sure.
Director Election, do you know what that revenue piece, like, wouldn't that, I mean, I don't know if were here when the board developed that policy or accepted that policy, but have you ever noticed that we have the policy and revenue piece?
Yeah, that we're doing revenue versus expenditure. Yeah,
So there's not a particular reason why I might have made that
No,
decision at the time? Okay,
that was here before I came.
Okay.
That's been for a long time. So I'm interested in if you have a recommendation whether expenditures over revenue.
I think expenditures are a little bit more, I mean, revenue is interesting because revenue can go up and down. Your expenditures, you should know what your expenditures are. You know that if you're getting a COLA or there's gonna be inflationary increases, you can kind of plan for that. So I see why most of the districts use expenditures as their base for, their fund balance policy. So, I don't know, I don't really have a recommendation one way or the other, but I just thought it was interesting that we're the only district that uses revenue and everybody else is using expenditures. In this area. We are.
Otherwise, that way, someone knows to like, move it this way.
But you're saying that the revenues fluctuate much more dynamically than the expenditures that maybe, well, we want.
Yeah, or somebody may inflate revenues when they shouldn't be inflating. I mean, there's so many things that can go into it, so it's just, it's revenues versus expenditures. I don't know, we're a small enough district that it doesn't really happen.
Expenditures would make sense to me because, I mean, why do you have a fund balance? You have a fund balance
To cover
to
expenditures.
cover over expenditures, if
Right.
expenditures get out of control. So that would make sense to me to use expenditures.
Yeah, and I might show you a reason why you might want to use the expenditures in one of the other graphs,
Okay.
that I'll show later down the line. Page 5 shows, the first, example that I provided you is the WASDA model policy. I did not find any district that's using the WASDA model policy, so I'm just gonna throw that out there, but I provided the information for you just so that you could see what the WASDA model policy was recommending. Again, no district in the surrounding area of Pearson King County is using the WASDA model.
So they do use the expenditures.
But they're all using expenditures,
Yeah,
yes.
So that's,
They are using expenditures.
okay.
The next one is the first example, that I came across. This one is probably the most restrictive. They require the school district to what they call an economic stabilization account. And it is on the revenues. They have a range of, between 3% and 5%. But if your level falls below 3%, you actually have to go to the board for a resolution. And then also develop a plan as to how you're going to replenish that fund balance. Okay, so it requires them to actually go to the board with a resolution saying that they are going to be under the 3%. And then they also must develop a plan to say how they're going to replenish that 3%. They are using the general fund expenditures of the most recent completed fiscal year as their guide for their, so they have a range of 3% and 5%, but it can't go below 3%. The next example is consistent with several districts, with the exception of maybe their percentages might be a little bit different, and things of that nature. So this one actually talks a little bit about, the need for a reserve of some sort. Because of enrollment fluctuations, so they actually go through and explain why it's really prudent for a school district to have a minimum fund balance policy. And then on top of that, they also explain the differences between the categories of what is in fund balance. So on our financial statements, we have guides from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB for short, that defines there's 5 components of fund balance. And so it goes through and defines what those 5 components of fund balance are. And so several districts have adopted this because people usually have questions, well, what does a restricted fund balance mean? What is that? And so they actually go through and they explain the categories of these different fund balance in their policy. So I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but it's in there. I find it's useful to have that explanation, but we're not required to do it. I can always also explain it in the board meeting that needs to be explained. So this example has a 3% of budgeted general fund expenditures. It doesn't say what year of your budgeted general fund expenditures. So I would really recommend that if we take this approach, that we say which fiscal year, is it the previous fiscal year, or is it the most recent ended fiscal year? You know, we want to be really clear so that there's no question as far as what are we looking at for budgeted expenditures.
Could you see a world where it's like current or future fiscal year, whichever's higher, so that you end with a higher estimated fund balance?
Yeah, and I think what happened or lower, it depends on the situation, and so people could play that game, and so I want to make sure that we're crystal clear.
So that requires, that leaves too much ambiguity. You'd prefer it to be.
Yeah.
More pointed.
Or
Okay.
if somebody else comes in and they're not really sure, they could change, and so you just want to be as clear as possible as far as what type of data that you're going to be looking at.
Part of this, this whole exercise to me, to review and says, come up with some things that would be preventative in terms of, having us fall into binding conditions.
Right.
Early warning signals. And then the other part for me is some of this we'll get to the later is advocacy to the legislature about how we're underfunded. But so I'm kind of inclined more, the thing about budget is it's more forward looking. So budget for the next year. So that's, part of the problem with that we got into getting into this, fund balance or binding conditions issue is that we didn't have enough kind of forward-looking predictive things coming at us. So I want to just make sure that we're kind of, if possible, look forward on some of these things, because if we know that, for example, if we budget that, we're going to have a decline in enrollment, or we're going to have a decline in the state or whatever, then that's all kinds of bells should go off. We should be very conservative and build up as much as possible. So I'm more inclined to the, forward looking, but yeah, budgeted expenditures sounds, that sounds like a rational way to do it.
In this policy, if you go below the threshold of 3%, there is a plan that is required to be presented on how that minimum fund balance will be replenished. So
That would have been really
Helpful.
in our situation, because these budgets just came in and they just, there wasn't really any discussion with that, so.
And is this like at the end of the year if it's below 3%, or is it like at any point during the year?
most districts do both at the end of the year.
Okay.
Because you will have fluctuations during the
Right.
year to be below 3%.
Sure, okay.
I think, I've talked about it quite frequently where, our apportionment proceeds, especially I would say June, July, there's potential because the legislature is talking about changing the apportionment schedule yet again, which is gonna be a super big problem, I think, for all school districts if they do that. A 0.5%, in March is a pretty big deal. Maybe the big districts, it won't be as much, but the small districts like us, that's a pretty big deal. So.
Which I'm just fine against
Yeah,
that particular issue.
So it's hard to maintain that 3% consistently across the fiscal year.
Is there something that and maybe this is more in the, how we talk about it and less in the policy, but, you know, if it's showing up 2 or 3 months in a row, or
Yes.
even, you know, where are those places again where our like red flags need to be raised, where then we're coming to you and saying, can you help us understand, one, how it's this way and how we're gonna get out of it? So that feels like it makes more sense and like more of a procedure rather than a policy.
Yeah, I'm calling those as we go forward with pilots. I found those look forwards, so
Yeah.
we got all these graphs and things in our thing. So I want in our budget guidelines, some, you know, if you see this in the reserve balance, like it goes, never goes below 0, or it goes down significantly year over year, then red flag should be.
Okay.
So examples 3 and 4 are, the wording is the same as example, 1, obviously. The only difference is that, example 3 is the 5% of previous year actual general fund expenditures. And then, example 4 is 5% of current year operating expenses. Example 4 was interesting because there was no plan required if they fall below, their 5%. So they were the only one that did not have a plan, that had to be submitted if they go below the 5%.
Impact of budgeted versus actual, like if we make a policy around expenditures, could one get us into more trouble?
I don't really, I don't think one gets you into more trouble than the other. I think, it's just being really mindful. So the 5% of current year operating expenses, that would be a year end where you would have to calculate your minimum fund balance at year end and then carry that through kind of the next fiscal year, that you're updating. So, you know, that one, I mean, I've seen districts do it that way, and I've seen them use the previous year's general fund expenditures. And the reason why they use the previous year is because it's just a little bit easier to track and maintain through the time. But I mean, either one works. You know, again, it's just the way you present it. So the example 5 was interesting to me, and I showed it only because this one, frankly, I think would be just a little bit more work, but it talks about 3% only of your basic ed, special ed, CTE, support services, and transportation. So your basic apportionment dollars, and it doesn't take into consideration anything else. Me personally, I don't like this one. I think it should be taken on either revenues or expenditures as a whole. Not necessarily just your apportionment, but I'm throwing it out there as an example and something for you to consider. This one also requires a plan on how the fund balance would be restored if you fall below that 3%. So a couple of things to note in this, we're the only district that has a 6% fund balance policy. Everybody else is between 3 and 5. Again, we use revenue, and everybody else that I was seeing was using expenditures of some sort, either actual or budgeted or, you know, even future. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of, the big, so you say Elevate, a lot of other people are 3 to 5, are those bigger districts?
I was finding it across the board, so
Okay.
I found it in big districts, I found it in small districts, I found it in medium-sized districts, so it just, I would say that even the biggest district in the state of Washington, Seattle, their range is 3 to 5%. And so a 5% fund balance for them is pretty large, obviously.
Yeah, right.
But they also have more to lose because they have, you know, a much bigger system than we do. You know, at 5%, I think would be good for our district. But if we want to keep it at 6, we can also keep it at 6%.
So the only reason that I, for you, thought 6 is good is, you know, when we get to the financial indicators, one of the measurements of financial indicators is is your, fund balance over 6%? So they're using that 6 number
Right.
to be a thing, and so, that's kind of, I think, where the 6 came from.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be a problem to go to 5. I do, right at this moment, would want to keep, probably not do the range thing, because we're entering into a highly uncertain period right now because of what's going on in the federal government.
Right.
And I think we should be building our reserves up to a higher level, because we're potentially going to take a significant hit, potentially, hopefully not, but, and I mean, if the federal government drives us into a recession, that's going to hit Washington State tremendously hard because of our sales tax and B&O tax. So given all those uncertainties, we should be building our reserves up. So
Which-
anyway,
Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't want to do, right, because then that's public dollars that we should be spending, right? But you're thinking about just
Yeah.
like
yeah,
in this interim time that we're in, with all of the uncertainty, it might be in our best
Yeah.
interest
I would
to
agree,
have a little bit
because
more scroll away.
6% of our total is a lot less than 6% of Seattle's total, right? So,
but then we have less expended. I mean, the
yeah,
majority of our expenditures.
that's our ability to react is limited.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think being conservative in these times is definitely.
Yeah.
managing.
But I do like, COVID expenditures, and I do like that number 2, I guess number 2, where you explain that. When I first came into this, I had to go through that exercise of, okay, all the different fund balances, and so just having that in there and then calling for a response automatically if things get low. I think all of those are good things.
Yeah.
That I'd like to see, but right now I think really sparse. That's all those other data, so. So I think all those recommendations are good.
Okay, and in the comparison of whether we're monitoring the expense side or we're monitoring balances. Of what we have in hand, I don't understand why we're not looking at both sides, period. I mean, is it just a lot of effort to do?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Well, you said we were unique in that we are looking hard at the expense side of the house. I think that's what you said.
It's that our fund balances is based on the
The
revenue.
revenue side, okay. So I don't understand why we're not monitoring both, but that's just, because that's just.
I mean, we do monitor.
Yeah.
both. Yes, that's a given. It's just that what do we want to calculate the minimum fund balance on? Is it on revenue or is it on expenditures? And so that's the question, of the day. And like I said, we're the only districts that is calculating this minimum fund balance amount based on revenue.
But is that the one that fluctuates the most?
I think their expenditures will fluctuate a little bit more. I mean, sometimes I'll bring last year as an example. We had all of the pipes break.
Yeah.
We had expenditures that we were not anticipating that took place. That comes into play when you do that. And so.
That's why you have reserves.
We had higher expenditures last year that we were not anticipating as a result of that. So that's an example of something that can fluctuate that you may not be.
Able to predict, but is that what a reserve fund's for?
Well, technically, yes,
Okay.
but we had no reserve fund. this year.
Yeah.
Which is why I think to the point of like having the reserve funds based on expenditures feels like a more safe option than revenue, because the expenditures are gonna happen whether we get the revenue or not, so we'd rather have the reserve to cover the expenditures. Yeah,
Well, if you think about revenue, are we talking total revenue net or gross revenue in the district? Like when you say revenue, what are we?
We're not gross revenue.
Okay, so gross revenue, so just like a 401k, right? I get my check, 4% or whatever goes to my 401k, that would be 4% of my gross revenue. That's what the district's doing. So to me, I think there was wisdom in doing that, because then it's a total of what we have for our gross, for what the district's paying, and then expenditures, everything's gonna come out of that. Your house
Yeah.
gets paid of it, your car gets paid, same as what we're doing here. I'm just trying to break it down just a little bit smaller. So I'm thinking there's wisdom in it, because it was our gross total of what we got that time. I agree with you, it's public funds, and that it should be used. And I think if we wanna go a step further, is if our amount that we've saved comes to a certain dollar amount, but when it goes far, and then we can put towards something else,
Exactly.
building fences, other building, et cetera, whatever, we could put that policy in there, but I think there's wisdom in it being a revenue versus an expenditures
I agree.
for that. My other, just real quick one, while I have the floor for a second. As far as checks and balances, and I hear what we're talking about here, but to be clear, it was negligence of the person in your position of how we got here in the past, and money being spent at the time that if it would have been better monitored and taken care of, we wouldn't have been writing checks. So when, to your point, your case in point, as far as numbers can be moved around in different things. What I hope to see on here, and I apologize, I haven't been to all the meetings that we've had for work, but what I'm hoping is, when we think of the checks and balances that are in here, what's the CFO's checks and balances? Who's checking your work? Is it DSD and OSPI? I already know that didn't, because we're in this position that's here. So when we're talking about different ones, I just want to know what that looks like. And also, if this goes to a 3% or something like that, you know, and the plan, which I do like that plan coming to the board and doing something. But if it's not reported, then what are the steps? If it's not being, you know, who's on the chopping block because of it?
Safety net.
Because I,
Superintendent.
exactly.
Right,
And
that's-
CFO, and that's what I'm saying. So we need to have these things, if we're gonna be looking at the policy as a whole. I just wanna see, yes, checks and balances that are in there. How the people that are responsible, what's the outcome of the people that are responsible, and I like.
So I guess with my curiosity around that example you just gave, okay, so we take 4% and we put it into our 401k, right?
Yep.
But then what happens if our chimney breaks? And we have to pay $10,000 to fix it, and we only have $5,000 in our savings because I've only put a percentage of my revenue versus a percentage of my projected expenditures.
Not projected, what we're going off is expenditures from the previous year before. And their expenditures, should never be more than what we make or have already brought in. And I'm just, tell me if I'm wrong, you can interrupt me anytime. Whatever our gross is, whatever we're bringing in, that's all we're getting. That's the whole kit and caboodle, right? And so we're taking percentage of the largest amount. Now, my expenditures last year were 75% of that, but I'm only gonna take 5% of the 75% of what was the projected expenditures, right?
And hopefully you have insurance for your chimney.
Or just to your point, you know, we need to have the money to backfill what I heard last time, some of these programs are different things, but we're taking the larger amounts. Because we're taking it from the gross total, not the net after everything's been paid. Am I correct? Okay.
So
Not to
the,
muddy the waters, but you will have situations where your expenditures might be larger than your revenues.
Say it
In
again, I didn't hear
normal times, you could have situations where your expenditures are greater than your revenues and you had planned for that. A good example is that you've been setting aside money
Yeah.
for several years and you need to do a curriculum adoption. So that you're using your savings account to pay for that curriculum adoption. That would be a good example of why you would want to use expenditures.
What I would think though, that's not the norm, and what I would expect is that the CFO and the superintendent would then come to the board and then explain that, and then we'd have a discussion around that.
And you can see it
But
coming.
the norm would not be, I would agree that would happen, but that's not the norm. At least if we're looking in the past.
And you can see it coming, so there's time to plan.
And either way, you have that solution.
Correct.
Right.
You use your expenditures and there'll be extenuating circumstances that need to be addressed. Even if you broke it down myopically to run your family, it happens.
Yeah.
And somebody needs an appendix.
Right.
And the insurance only covers so much, and you gotta,
I guess the other curiosity I have is knowing that our work is underfunded, right? So yes, we have to have a balanced budget, right? That's ideal, right? That we don't spend more than we make. And there are instances in which we spend more than we make. And so that's kind of why I went back to like, what's gonna get us to the higher number of reserves quicker and a more stable 5% of whatever. So like, you know, and if that's revenue, let's go with revenue, but if it's expenditures, I'd rather go with what's gonna get us the most consistent amount of ongoing reserve funds.
And I think that's a very pointed question. For me, it seems more responsible to do it on the revenue, because you know what's in your hand. And even as expenditures are budgeted, you can still make decisions on how you're gonna approach expenditures. So I get it. I don't know, I think it's easier to, I should say easier, it's more effective to balance the budget if you're parsing what you actually have.
So the thing with revenue in this business, for one thing, it can vary based on your enrollment
Yeah.
potentially fairly significantly. So that's not a stable number. It also can vary because the legislature can do things to us that you may not have anticipated in your budget. So the question is revenue, what number revenue do you take a number that you think we're gonna get at the beginning of the year?
Well, the current policy says 6% of the district's budgeted.
Okay, so budgeted,
So
yeah,
it's on
right.
budgeted, which is, I think,
Yeah.
frankly, it's easier to do it on a budgeted base than actual, because obviously we're not done with the fiscal year.
Yeah.
When we're finishing the budget book and
Right.
trying to determine what that should be, and then kind of maintain that. So
Right.
this one says budgeted, it's easier to track than actuals.
Yeah.
So that you're monitoring that.
Yeah, there's just a lot of potential variation with revenue that makes me a little uncomfortable about depending on that number.
So in your experience, I think it's important that we understand what you would favor. I know you've offered us a smorgasbord here, but what are you used to? What makes sense?
I'm used to expenditures. I came from a district that used it. I'm in like several districts that I've worked in that use the expenditure side. Like I said, we're the only district that I've seen that is using revenue. I'm not opposed to using revenue at all. You know, it's, you know, we're a small enough district that I think the difference between the revenues and expenditures isn't going to be that significant. You know, $100,000 maybe between the two. It's not, I don't think it's significant enough for us to worry about, you know, one way or the other. I would recommend though, that if we're going to continue using revenue, that we continue with what's in the current board policy and use the budgeted revenue. You know, when we're budgeting, we always set aside some capacity, both in revenue and expenditures for unknown grants that may come to us. Which is always a good thing, because otherwise we're having to come to the board to do a budget extension, which is kind of a pain. So we always do put in some capacity, and so that would be included in that revenue for the budgeted revenue category. So that does give,
That could give us more
that
potential.
could give us a little bit more potentially as a result, because we're planning that way on.
That's a good
The
point.
other thing that I think, I mean, if all the, I mean, I'm not an accountant, I'm not an expert in school finance. So if almost every other school district is using expenditure, I gotta say, well, why are they doing that? And why are we doing something else? I mean, if we deviate, I would want a really good reason for deviating. And I'm not convinced that we should at this point.
We've been consistent and successful for the most part with what we do.
Well,
I don't know how we landed on it initially.
Yeah.
we haven't been successful in financial planning because we're in binding conditions, so.
Well, we're in binding conditions because of a trifecta of
yeah.
horrible events that
Yeah.
occurred. And
Yeah.
we're not the only school district, and I bet we can find another one going through the same thing, who actually takes it from the opposite theory. The question, you know, I'm just used to looking at both sides of the house, and so emphasizing one and saying, let's hang our hat on that. already makes me
Well,
uncomfortable.
you want to be consistent in policy. You
Yeah.
need to be consistent because people could play the game. And it could be
Yeah.
really easy of, well, let's use revenue this year. Oh, well, no,
I see.
you know, well, let's
I
use
see.
expenditures this year.
Yeah,
I am not recommending one. I'm not recommending both because that's where the games start being
Okay,
played.
gotcha,
I'm not comfortable.
But again, it doesn't mean that we're not, intensely tracking both, right? It's just, this is just in relation to how much money and which indicator we want to use to determine how much money we're putting in our savings, basically.
Yeah.
Our rainy day fund.
I usually favor the, what your budget is when you start, because that's what you try to stay within. It's to me weird to load up all your expenses and figure out how you're gonna stretch your limited funds, but it's,
yeah, the one that I would, since the legislature meets right in the middle of the school year, they can do things to us that, you won't know until kind of it's, and some of those things could cause us to have to pull from our reserves, like, pushing out a portion of dollars. They're gonna cause us to have, the only reason we're alive today is because we have a capital projects fund that has dollars in it.
And answer.
And that's, if we didn't have that, we would have been dead. So, but now, we're not gonna have that. That's not available all the time. And so that's what the fund balance is supposed to be. So we really need to make sure we have money there.
The fund balance also helps with any legislative unfunded mandates.
Yes, yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Right.
Which we get many of
Yes.
this year. Which I think is actually, in my opinion, a little bit of a case for expenditures, right? Because we might have to spend money on things that we don't actually get revenue for.
Which, we absolutely do.
Yeah.
The legislature could do that in the middle of the session and say, oh, we want to do this new safety program, we want you to do a new report, whatever it is, and then no money.
And so then on a year-to-year basis, we know that we can cover those expenditures and have some reserve to do that,
Yeah,
regardless of what our revenue ends up being for a particular budget year.
right.
I'm confused because I don't see how that works if the expenditures comes in the middle of the year. From, like you're saying, from legislation, we have to have our 6% budget at the beginning of the year, right? So that we can put that into the budget for the following year. If we get hit with something in the middle, then that will actually take from our total gross, over our budget. If either way, we're gonna still have to come here, right? And they're gonna still have to present that this money needs to be spent. And we're not gonna make the balance, but the expenditures, if it's as fluid as you think, I would like to front load it at the budget looking our year out versus as trying to anticipate what may come throughout the year. So if I knew that we're gonna have 6% cost of staff, cost of this, all right, we built this budget, boom, we're up and running. This is where we're gonna go. Okay, now we're falling behind 3% because the legislation did something. Then they come to us, make a presentation, why are we at 6%? This is why, et cetera, and going on. So that's why I'm just trying to.
Okay, so in similar, so let's say this budget cycle, this year, legislator comes in and says, you need to do X, Y, and Z, we're not giving you any money. Okay, so our expenditures increase. So then going into next year, if we were to do, say 6% based on expenditures of the previous year, that would include the unfunded mandate, what we spent on it, even though we're not getting money for it, right? So again, it's based on what we have to pay out versus what we get in, because we're not getting any more money for this thing that we have to spend money on.
Sure.
And if the fund balance is based on, that's when we get to decide whether it's based on the previous year's expenditures or the future year's budgeted expenditures.
Which is impossible what I'm hearing to say. So if it was the previous year, playing to that part, playing to your part is, all right, so it's previous year's expenditures. Then we're gonna look back and make our budget on there. So if we look back on our expenditures, however, the legislation does something else again that costs us more, how do we meet the fund balance between this gap now that we have with the new mandate and the.
I don't know, we're not doing it with revenue either. Because we're not getting more revenue to offset the 3% difference between the two.
Correct, but if you're front loading the revenue, right, if we're budgeting it at the beginning of the year on total projected revenue, then at least we have a number that's solid on the gross versus trying to, what I'm hearing, determine what we're gonna spend and then taking off on that percentage, right?
Okay, let me actually, a question for you, because I think where I'm getting confused is, we're not talking about what's budgeted, we're talking about what is in our savings account. Right, so or, I don't know,
So your fund balance is essentially your savings account.
right,
At your
yeah,
end. And
yes,
so the calculation currently, so let's say we have $100 million in revenue. And the way that the current policy reads, 6% of the budgeted revenue of the previous year. So let's say we had $100 million in,
Revenue.
budgeted revenue, sorry, I can't speak today either. As we are ending this fiscal year, because it was last fiscal year of that budgeted revenue. As we're ending this fiscal year, that means that we need to set aside, or we should have in our fund balance, our savings account, we should have $6 million. That's right, yes, $6 million, sorry, I can't even do math today. So, so that is how the current system would work.
I guess, okay, so do we squirrel money away every month? Like, I guess, how do we get to that 6%, and then maintaining 6% is a whole other thing, right?
Right.
But, because it's not necessarily as cut and dry as I'm investing in my 401k 4% of my paycheck every month, right? You don't just take 6% of our revenue and put it in our savings account. We can't,
It's fluctuating.
it fluctuates, right? It's just, the goal is by the end, we've got 6% that is there to support us in a rainy day, or when an unexpected expenditure comes up.
And so the way you're doing that is you're making sure that your revenues and the set aside that you need that you're in your savings account is then will equal what that is based on your expenditures. So when you're budgeting in this current year, we've got to make sure that our revenues are sufficient enough and that our expenditures are less than that in order to get to a 6% fund balance.
Yes.
So that we do have that rainy day fund in place. That is the only way that you get there. It's the only way you get there.
So what I'm hearing, I mean, the difference between expenditures, revenue is,
The
I mean,
way,
we're spending a lot of time talking about it, and I'm not sure it makes that
It
much
doesn't
difference.
really make it, I mean, it does
Yeah.
not make a huge difference.
So-
It's a calculation.
I think my brain, I don't understand, that's work.
So, yeah, it's just a calculation. That's all it is. And it's either on your gross revenue or it's on some sort of expenditure, whether it's your previous fiscal year expenditures, your budgeted expenditures, or what have you. It is simply a calculation to say this is what your set aside is.
I wonder for the purposes of kind of getting the policy rolling, what if, so I heard from Director Larson, you like that school district example too, that has kind of those explanations, definitions. Any thoughts on that from either of you? Sorry, that's on page 6 of the presentation. The reason why I ask is maybe what we could recommend and move forward is going ahead and drafting this new policy with the same percent and revenue language that we have. And then when it comes up to the board for the first look, we can have a little bit more dialogue about that revenue versus expected piece if we want, or we can, but I think the actual constructing of the policy.
So when you said page 6, did you mean example 1?
Page 6, example 2.
Example 2 starts at the bottom of page 5 and then goes into page 6.
Yeah. So example 2 deviates significantly from what we're doing today.
Correct.
Or what we currently have. Yes.
Yeah, so you're asking us to move to
So what I'm asking is, so she gave us several different examples of different policies that we could use in updating our policy. We could, of course, keep this exact same language that we have and keep our policy the same. But this example, I know Director Larson said he liked this example. I like this example. The reason why is because it provides more information about the different funds that we have. So it's just a little bit more robust to say similar things that we say in our policy now. What would be different in this policy versus the one that we'll get a first read of is the number, instead of 3%, we'll say 6% based on budgeted revenue. Because we're gonna keep that piece of our budget for now. We're just adding all this other stuff to provide more context and information for someone that might look at our policy.
So the difference between 1 and 2 is 1 is supply side analysis and 2 is expense side analysis. So it's a huge jump. I
So
think
we're
that's
not-
missing the boat here.
So no, so the piece about the actual percentage that we're talking about and the stream, revenue or expenditures, ignore that part, because we're keeping it the same as our current policy.
So
What I-
supply side.
What I'm asking
Okay,
is,
we're not, we're good. Yes. The difference would be then,
scroll down a little bit.
Yeah.
What I'm asking more is how do we like the layout of all of this to provide detailed context and information about, yeah, about different things. Ignore the part that's at the bottom about 3% of budgeted general fund expenditures. We're not adding that, we're not changing that.
so.
In our-
It'll say,
It'll say 6%.
Budgeted.
Yeah,
So stay with supply
As-
side,
As a,
keep the 6%, but have this kind of information.
correct.
correct.
I'm good with that.
Okay, great. Perfect. Cool.
All right. So then if we can move on to the next item, which is some budget guidelines in the handbook. And like I said, in order for me to provide some good information and look for you all, we really need to change our financial reports, because the way our financial reports are as of today will not provide you any information of workforce, to be very blunt and honest. So on page 9, 10, 11, and 12, those are the graphs that I currently provide in our financial reports. And it's not every single graph. I didn't pull in every single graph, but it's close enough to every single graph. And these graphs only provide you the year-to-date projection, year-to-date actual, and then what we have set in the budget. It provides you no historical reference anywhere, so that you can make any comparisons or look fors to say, this is really jumping out at me. Why is this taking place? Okay. So I am recommending that we make some changes to our financial report so that it is more reflective of potentially some graphs or other information that might jump out at you. And it may have created some questions for you, 2 years ago when financials started looking different. The fund balance graph overall that we use is a good graph. But what this does is it's only showing you as a percent of the revenue. So this is tying back to, are we meeting the 6% fund balance? It's a good graph, but I also think that we should be providing the monthly fund balance in dollars as well, which is on page 13. So the graphs are very, very similar in nature, as far as the trend lines are concerned. But you can also look at the numbers themselves and see pretty quickly, what was transpiring and when fund balance really started taking a dive. And so you can do some comparisons, like in 21-22 in September, the district started at almost $3.5 million. That following fiscal year, they were down to $848,000. That should have been a red flag right there. That probably wasn't seen because the dollar amounts weren't jumping out at you as well. Okay. I don't mind providing, this is Tuckwola's information. I've already done this graph, so I don't mind providing you both pieces of information if you are okay with that. So one of them shows you as a percent of the revenue to see if we're tracking to the 6% fund balance, and the second one is just simply a, fund balance dollar amount, month over month.
I like that.
The month over month for the fund balance though, is there a way to get the total expenditures against what was brought in? So that I can,
I'll give you these
oh,
for
you
something
great,
like
you're
that.
over there, I love it, perfect.
This is really good.
Yeah, so and this is what I'm envisioning, you know, in the handbook, there'll be a little section
Yeah.
about look fors and things. So
Yeah.
on the one that has percentage, the first look for happened when we had started the year in 21-22 with 6% fund balance and started the year in 22-23 with, you know, 2% fund balance. So any leap of that, probably, I don't know, more than 1%, I don't know, something like that, should immediately set up some flares. And then again, you know, when we got to, and the same year of 22-23, which was the year that, you know, things went south, is as soon as in like, whatever month that is, I guess the month, January, when the fund balance went below zero, then even more red flags should have gone off. Either of those, because the key about that January 23, it's like I say, it's kind of late. I mean, the earlier one would have caught it earlier, but that one was before the May deadline for you know, laying off staff. And so that should have immediately said, we're gonna have to do a large reduction in force in May. And that didn't happen, and so then the whole thing kind of
Yeah.
went down from there.
Your other look for between 21, 22, and 22, 23 is that, you know, if you look at October's percent, 8.5%, and you're dropping in half in October,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden you're down to a 0.9% in November, that's alarming. I mean,
Okay.
the bells and whistles should have been going off at that point, saying, Houston, we have a problem. We
Right.
have a really big problem.
Yeah.
Because to see a drop in percentage in those years and those months, that is really problematic, really problematic.
Yeah, so that list of just here are the things to look for, that way the next board coming in can have those lists, just here's what we should look for.
Right. The next page, so are you opposed to both graphs? I mean, like I said, one is a percentage, one is just a
I like
dollar
them.
amount.
I like them both.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only thing, if I can get an ask, on here would be, if it dips below the percentage of which we ask, is there like some sort of key to highlight? So if you could highlight, so say for October, it dropped down 550, you know, 7,922, that box would be highlighted.
Yes.
So maybe we have a 5%, a 4%, a 3%, and then just make it as simple as you can for me would be super.
Okay.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is another example of a district where, I actually like this one as well. This one's a salary and benefits. So it's expenditures, showing the expenditure side. It's showing it in a couple of different ways. It shows the numbers, over a period of time, and then it also gives you a graph below. So that you can see, the information in a graph form. And so what this does is, you know, if there's, you're looking at your variances, between fiscal years, I think what I would do is I would add a variance column between 22, 23, 23, 24, and then another one between 23, 24, and 24, 25 in dollar amounts. So when these variances are quite large between the years, there's a way that we can provide an explanation of what's happening. And so on this graph, what you don't see, because this is not showing, it's not getting to the point yet, but I would have been asking questions in March. In 22, 23, and 23, 24, that's a $1.6 million difference in those two fiscal years. And this is a big district, but that's pretty alarming. So what's happening? Is it pretty common to see that? Is there a certain payout that happens one time a year that happens in March? I can't really tell by the data, because it's only showing me the two fiscal years, but that is something to me that would have really jumped out at me. You know, had I been in this district and I was sitting in your seat, I would be asking why is this happening? The other thing that's interesting that I want to point out on this is their total expenditures in 22, 23, and 23, 24 were 106 and 102% above their budget just in salaries and benefits. And when you're looking at a district this size where it's about 85 to 88%, that's a little bit alarming as well. So it's, you know, some of this information you can go in and see, and you can ask some of these questions and kind of monitor where are we and what are we doing. Again, the graphs as well provide you that historical kind of perspective as far as what's happening in the district.
When they have the budget of the actual for the staffing here, and the difference, is that the total budget just for the staff and benefits, or is
Yes.
that the total budget?
No,
Okay,
it's just for staff,
So then
just for
there's
staff
gonna
and
be-
benefits.
so they're expecting to backfill from somewhere.
Yes.
Uh-huh, okay.
So they at a time, for a period of time, had a really healthy fund balance. And this, going into this fiscal year, they had to make some significant cuts because of this trend, because they were above their budgeted salaries and their revenues weren't keeping pace. And so they were a district that made some significant cuts going into the 24-25 school year as a result. So
So typically, you know, as we know, 85% of school districts' budget is staff expenses. And, you know, almost all of these kinds of things are related to contracts.
Mhm.
And because that's where we decide how much it gets paid. And so that's, I mean, there's been numerous districts around us and here where have negotiated contracts that are above really their ability to pay.
Right.
Because they pulled it out of their reserve funds. And doing that year after year after year is part of the reason we're where we are.
Yeah, and this district actually, in the middle of 23-24, reopened the contract
Wow.
and had to renegotiate because they would have been in a negative fund balance had they not done so. So they actually reopened all of their contracts and renegotiated. So you see, like in June and July, you start seeing the expenditures from year to year or less than the previous years because they went in and they renegotiated their contracts.
Good work.
If
Is what
it,
you're telling me is this crap
It
work.
did, but it was very painful.
I'm sure.
But for the
if the employee side of that, or the bargaining unions didn't want to do it, then they would have to follow layoff procedures.
Yeah.
As prescribed, so that's why they got agreement, so everybody could keep floating. Okay.
What happens a lot in the bargaining is there's disagreement on what the actual numbers are for a school district. And so it's really imperative that we have solid numbers. I mean, that's what happened in our last negotiation, which is why, and eventually it happened and just, I think I know, it's just this. So it just points out the point of having solid, trusted numbers.
Right,
Because if you don't, then,
yeah, everything.
yeah.
And a solid policy of what you're gonna file for.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
what we need to have in your
But
service.
and so we had that 6%, but, you know, I remember a long time ago, contract negotiations used to respect that policy, and then it stopped. They didn't respect the policy anymore, because they didn't trust the numbers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are the dynamics that we need to
The
do.
policy at the end of the day is just words on a paper. And it's how it's actually operationalized that.
Yeah.
And supported and accountable.
Right.
Okay.
So page 15 is the same exact example, except this is everything other than salaries and benefits. So this comes from the same school district. This is a really good example because there was a huge variance in September and October between 23, 24, and 24, 25. And you can see here where they provided the explanation as to why. At the bottom, it says there was a running start payment accrual that wasn't paid until November, and then there was a tiny difference between their insurance payment that they made. And so this is a really good example of where you can see the variances that would be pretty large, where the expectation would be that there's an explanation as to why there's this variance. I do like percentage columns in here as well, because then, you know, over a certain percent, it should be kind of an automatic where there's some sort of, you know, brief explanation as to why and what's happening. And so this is just another example of this type of scenario. On page 16 is a different school district. And so this, I've shown Director Larson this one already. This is just a graphical example of total general fund revenue, total general fund expenditures, and then the general fund balance. Expenditures are hard because they're not always consistent equal payments over years, and you can see that very clearly here. But you also do get some trends out of that. If there's something a little bit crazy going on, you can explain that. But your revenues and your fund balance are a lot more consistent across the board. And so you can see, you should be seeing over time kind of this trend analysis. Now, for the revenues in period 5, and their periods here are represented, they call them periods and they number them, it's actually the month. So September, October, November, December, January, period 5 is January. In the revenue column here in 21, 22, you kind of saw a dip as far as kind of what the revenue was looking like compared to everywhere else. And so, that could have begged the question, hey, what was going on here? And we don't have other fiscal years that go along with this, but there's kind of that huge gap there. So it's like, well, wait, what happened this fiscal year compared to the other two? The same goes with the general fund balance in Fund 10, especially in the 23-24 school year. It really drops significantly compared to the other months. You see a dip, which is consistent across those fiscal years. But the question is, how come it dipped so much in period 10 in the 23-24 school year? And so those are some of the things that would be good at an explanation as to why. So this is just a really simple trend graph, just to give you overall totals, year over year.
I guess my other question, when I was looking at this one is, does this, and since we don't have kind of our regional, fund balance graph that we use, right? Does this give us any additional information about that?
Yeah, and I think I only had it in here because I was just able to take a picture of it. They put all of this on one page, and so it was just the picture.
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't do a general fund because we already do ours, which I think is already really useful, but the revenue and expenditure trend graph is usually just a pretty good snapshot as far as what's going on. Like I said, expenditure is going to be a little bit further just because of timing differences, on when you make, especially some of the big payments. Like if you make your insurance payment in September 1 month versus October when it's due, that's going to skew your graph.
Right.
But it should be something that can be easily explained as well.
Right.
The next two graphs, they're coming from the same district. It gives you kind of a cash graph. So this kind of goes in hand with your fund balance. It's not something that we do. I actually have a graph. I just don't present it to you all. That shows your cash. They call them cash and cash equivalents. It's just an accounting term, but it's basically your cash with our accounting treasurer. And so again, it's a trend analysis as far as what's going on. I think if this would have been provided to the board as well, you would have seen those negative cash balances pretty quickly, and really would have seen a dive in cash that would have coincided with the fund balance. So that's one. The second one is an investment revenue graph. I don't find this particularly useful, only because King County is our treasurer, and so it's kind of out of our control as far as what we're getting in investment proceeds. It's just based on what the pool rate is, and what their investment policies are as far as how much money we might make. The rates were really low for a long time when the interest rates were low, so it coincides with the interest rates. If interest rates are really low, pool rates are going to be really low. As the interest rate starts to rise, then our pool rates, investment rates start to rise as a result. So, but again, it was just a snapshot of something that's on like one particular page. I just don't know if you would find that useful. I don't think it particularly is, so.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, okay, when interest rates go up, okay, we get more in savings, but on the other hand, we have to pay out more because of the cost of living, the IPDs goes up, so it's kind of a,
Exactly. The next page is, an example of revenue and expenditures in comparison to fund balance over time. So, Director Simpson, this might get you closer to what you were requesting. So on page 18, it shows, total revenues and total expenditures, compared to the, fund balance trend. And then it also provides you kind of in the background what the budgeted amounts were as well. So it's a pretty nice graphical representation of totals over time, which shows both budgeted and actual, and then a fund balance trend line that goes along with it. So this is something that a school district in the area also uses when they're providing information.
Kind of a nice burn rate indicator.
Yeah. This next slide is also coming from the same district. It's just a fund balance to cash projection slide. So again, it's a trend graph over time that shows the fund balance compared to your cash, the bank cash on hand. And again, you can kind of see how it trends together nicely. So this is just something else that's used in the district, providing information.
Yeah, this is another one, that it adds any additional information,
Okay.
so.
All right. So any questions in that section? Is there anything that jumps out at you?
Just clarifying, the cash in one of the cash, when you say cash, you're talking about just any money that we have on hand? Or is that like specific? Yeah, what does that mean?
So we don't have a lot of cash on hand.
Okay,
I mean, we really don't.
Okay.
We have two what we call Enquest accounts, so little checking accounts that we have for emergencies. I think one of them hasn't been used in a couple of years. I think it's because the dollar amount's too low on it. So we have one for payroll. So if somebody's direct deposit goes bad, we should have money in that so that we could do a replacement rather than having to go through the whole process. I've just kind of started looking at that now. It's like been so low on my priority list. So that's something I'll probably come to the board to ask for authorization to increase that. The other one is the small Enquest account that we use for little things where somebody needs like a check to do a registration for a band event or something, and I think we use that maybe 3 times a year. And, that was like a $2,500 little checking account that we use to and replenish it. At the end of the year.
so when you refer to cash,
So cash is what we have with the county treasurer. So it's all of our deposits. So it's all of our revenue we receive
okay,
for the month. So it's our apportionment, it's our grant payments. If we do any invoicing out, like our food service revenue, all of that stuff comes in and is deposited and it goes to King County. And that's our cash.
got it, okay.
So what I don't see in the reports is any loans that we've taken or currently have.
Correct.
I want to make sure that that's reported somewhere against what we have. I'm not sure what that's gonna look like. But if we take even interim loans, whatever, small ones are, if any interest is needing to be paid, and then just the whole, as a reminder on there, when they're gonna be projected to be paid back and how. And then obviously when you've done here before, just saying, I'm gonna need to do this again, or et cetera, and then get to the board. So I would definitely want to see that on here. As far as sometimes for me, it would be really nice to, like what you do now, just have our budget at the beginning, right, on there. What our loans are that's there, our staff projected, there, and then the monthly report to reflect how we're on mark with that. Now, I understand the district's very unique and when it gets monies and et cetera, and I think at that time we could have that conversation because it'll be a learning curve for myself and for anybody else who sits in this chair is, like you said, in April. Whenever the tech that comes in, okay, it's down now. This is a trend that we've seen in the past, but it's gonna be back up. And then making sure that we can keep our eye on that 6% fund as we go along. And that's how I'm kind of envisioning how a report would come out, to get here. This is really a lot of good stuff for sure. For it, but I don't know if, for me, and it's, for myself, I just need to see that mark and see how we're trending as far as staff, like your example of it, 106% on the staff part, and then if you look on the graph below, they were under budgeted, $20,000, but it still didn't make up the difference, so they were gonna be in a negative at that time, which then leads me to say, okay, then they're not getting their fund balance if their 3% or 5% is not happening, right? And so taking these reports, making them as simple for me as possible. And then being able to ask the questions, I guess, and on a monthly basis versus a quarterly or half year, as you see it come in or change.
Yeah, so the cash projections report will not change. That is something I think I'm hearing word that, they're going to, they, OSPI is going to start, I think, putting that in more of a mandate that school districts provide some sort of projection to, their school boards, like we're doing now. They've really been pushing it here in our region and also in the region in Olympia, to, make sure that we're providing that information to our boards as well. So that data point will not be changing, as far as the projections are concerned. When it comes to the interfund loans, I think that's a little bit useful when you see it, especially when you're looking at cash, because then you can put in that inflection point as to say, hey, we, during this month of this year, we took, we had to take an interfund loan. And so then we can have some of those explanations on there as well.
Just for as far as for budgeting wise, because if I see the loans, if I see the budget and it's based on staff and expenses, but I can't see that we have a loan out there, drawing the line, but that is also an expense that needs to be paid back. And then just making sure that that connection's there, so that I'm not missing that piece when I'm looking at just these two, right? Because I'll think we're on track and not know that we have this loan of 800,000, or whatever we have out there, that we still is against our, our
Yeah.
budget. So that.
Do we want to get into the next part around the OSPI? We just recognize that we have something 4 minutes of this meeting, or do we want to save that for another work session? What would you?
How many more slides we have?
Like, I have quite a few more slides, so there's several slides, still to go through. So yes, we can save it and continue on to the next.
If any folks have any strong feelings in me.
Yeah, I mean, the rest of this, we discussed the kind of the policy one, the rest is kind of guidelines that we put in the budget, or in the board book, so.
Okay.
It can,
It can be it doesn't have to be decided today.
Right.
No, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm gonna propose that we, go ahead and, move to the, kind of close this report down, and then we'll resurface it, later. I just want to say thank you for putting all this together and for doing some of our heavy lifting and our own board goals. So thank you for that. Yeah, really appreciate that. Okay, so, we've now got time for public comment. Is there anyone online? No, okay. So since there's no one, joining us online, presumably there's no one there to offer public comment because they're not there. And no one here in person. So we'll go ahead and move to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you. Sorry to cut your time.
Yeah. Back to this.
See.
You want to